This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting Chief Anchor George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning. We are coming on the air with breaking news now. In this election of 2020, Joe Biden has pulled ahead of Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania, the critical state of Pennsylvania. You see it right there, right now. After days of counting, he now leads Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania by 6,000 votes, 20 electoral votes at stake. If you look at the entire map right now, Joe Biden is now leading in enough states to give him more than the 270 electoral votes he needs to be the next president of the United States. We are not ready to project all those states yet, but those are states where Joe Biden now has the lead. I want to go straight to Tom Yama. Show us what happened in Pennsylvania.
Okay, George, so a lot has changed since we went to bed last night. Let's dig in a little deeper with Pennsylvania right now. So as you mentioned, Joe Biden has taken the lead right now. He has about a 6,000 vote lead. It's just under 6,000 votes. We still know there's 130,000 ballots that still need to be counted. So if you're at home, you're saying, well, this race is very close. We're talking about a 6,000 vote lead. There's 130,000 ballots that can still be counted. President Trump possibly can catch up. Maybe. But here's the problem for President Trump. We know that at least 60%, 60,000, I should say, 60,000 of those 130,000 ballots that have yet to be counted are coming from these deep blue areas. They're coming from Philadelphia, the surrounding suburbs, up through the Lehigh Valley, and actually Joe Biden is making eastern Pennsylvania even more blue.
And Tom, let me just stop you there.
Yeah, sure.
Through the night, Joe Biden has been winning through the days. He's been winning those deep blue areas by, 70-80% in places.
Yeah, I can actually show you, because of the mail-in vote, when we look at Pennsylvania, you look at this ratio right here. This is pretty much the breakdown, George. 80% of the mail-in ballots are going towards Joe Biden. So that's one of the reasons why he's on top in Pennsylvania. I also want to say 30,000 of that 130,000 still to be counted is coming from Pittsburgh, also a very deep blue county, George.
And Tom, also overnight, Joe Biden pulled ahead in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, right. So when we went to bed, President Trump had a 2,000 vote lead in the state of Georgia. At this hour, right now, we know that Joe Biden is on top with 1,000 votes. Still very, very tight. There's still about 8,000 votes still to be counted there in Georgia, so it could be anyone's race. The reason why Joe Biden is on top is because the votes are coming in from places like Gwinnett County. This is outside of Atlanta, one of the suburbs. You can see the ratio here. He's up 58.3 to 40.4, but it's other counties that are even bigger for Democrats. Places like Fulton and places like Clayton. Look at this, 84% of the vote going to Joe Biden. When the votes are coming from there, that's why you see Biden taking the lead, George.
Okay, Tom, thanks very much. Let's go to Georgia now. Steve Osunsami is there. The votes have been coming in through the night. This could still take some time, though, in Georgia, Steve.
It could. We expect to hear more from the Secretary of State today. He's holding a news conference shortly where he plans to discuss some of the numbers. But, George, I just want to underline there are a lot of Georgians who are waking up this morning, both Democrats and Republicans, wondering what Georgia did they wake up in. That's how significant this lead that Joe Biden has taken is. If he is able to hold on to it, he will accomplish something in Georgia. We keep saying this over and over again, that President Barack Obama wasn't able to do twice. It is really breaking the conventional wisdom that we are seeing here. And there are people on the left who are obviously celebrating and are pointing out that people like Stacey Abrams had a lot to do with this lead. And John Lewis, part of his district in Clayton County, was responsible for a number of these votes that fell in favor of Joe Biden, as Tom just explained. About the vote itself, the Secretary of State, who I will underline is a Republican, we'll get more to that later, he points out that there are about 8,000 to 9,000 outstanding votes. We're also going to be counting military and overseas votes today. About 17,000 of those, I think, or so have already, 18,000 of those military and overseas ballots have already come in and are already counted. The Secretary of State believes that there may be about 9,000 potential more of those ballots that have to be in by the end of the day today. So that's where this lead could be adjusted and where the president possibly could gain a few more votes. The other thing I'll point out is that there is this huge effort right now. There's a new ground war that's taking place. It's on the left and the right, with both Democrats and Republicans encouraging voters who may have had issues with their absentee ballots that can be fixed to do so by the end of business today. They call those cured ballots. Those ballots could make a difference. Tom mentioned Gwinnett County. Gwinnett County finished counting most of their votes last night. They are planning to submit them today. We expect those votes to count. That is a blue county now. The Latino vote there is big. We could expect this number to shift again after Gwinnett's numbers are counted.
Steve, right now we're well within the margin for an automatic recount.
We are, and the Secretary of State is already prepared for that. He has said that a recount, and this is what he said yesterday, that a recount shouldn't change the numbers much, but he's gotten new equipment. He said it would take a week for a recount. Either candidate can order one if it stays within that margin of error. And something about the Secretary of State that I keep saying and want to say again is that, you know, for all of these allegations about Democrats stealing elections and some of this notion that the election is being stolen, that's not going to play as well in this state where Republicans control the legislature, the governor's office, and where the Secretary of State, who runs the elections here, is not only a Republican, but also a supporter of the president.
Okay, Steve, thanks very much. Let's go up to Pennsylvania right now. Eva Pilgrim is there. Joe Biden now in the lead, many more votes to come.
Yeah, and I think you have to point out this morning, it was that big ballot drop from Philadelphia that put him in the lead. It was about 30,000 ballots from Philadelphia that were counted, and the people here in this city sort of celebrated that moment. You have to remember that Donald Trump pointed out Philadelphia multiple times, saying bad things happen in Philadelphia. This city's really proud. It's a proud city, proud of their history, proud of their people, and they view Joe Biden as one of them. You have to remember, Dr. Jill Biden is from this area, and so they are kind of celebrating that this count from Philadelphia is what put him over the top at this point. George, I also want to point out we're still watching to see as these ballots come in, and we're looking for this magic number of about 34,000. That would put him, Biden, ahead of a possible recount here in Pennsylvania. He is not at that point yet, George.
Eva Pilgrim, thanks very much. Let's go now to the Republican Senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey. Senator Toomey, thanks for joining us this morning. Joe Biden has pulled ahead. Do you think the president still has a chance in your state?
He does, George. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but there is certainly still a path for the president. First of all, it's an extremely narrow lead. And I think we've got to remember that this process goes beyond, the first vote count. For instance, in Pennsylvania, we know there are some minor irregularities. Those will have to be litigated. There's been a terrible lack of transparency in the Philadelphia vote counting process. And we have a rogue state Supreme Court that unilaterally decided to violate the U.S. Constitution and rewrite election law to allow ballots without a postmark to be counted days after the election.
Well,
I doubt very much
the Supreme Court ratified that, didn't they?
No, they did not. No, George, they did not ratify that. They said by a 4-4 decision, they would not impose an injunction at that time, leaving the door open for addressing that in a subsequent case. I think that's likely to happen. And so, for instance, if it turns out that it is that category of ballots that create the margin of victory for Vice President Biden, I have no idea whether that's the case or not, but that's the kind of thing that would have to be litigated. So I think we've got a long way to go. We've got to finish the counting, and all legal ballots absolutely have to be counted, and that takes as long as it takes. There's probably going to be a valid, legitimate recount, and then there will be legitimate litigation. I just think that's the way it's going to go, and people need to be patient. We need to let this process play out.
It was the president who said we should stop the counting, but just a couple of points there. Number one, the ballots that have come in so far do not include anything that was received after November 3rd, right now, at least in the current.
Wait, hold on, George. I'm not aware that that's the case, and I don't know how we could know that in Philadelphia, since observers have not been given the opportunity to get close enough to observe.
Well, the Supreme Court ordered those observers to come in, and in fact, we've all been watching the count on television. George. I was talking to the Lieutenant Governor this morning, and he said there have not been any widespread irregularities, no widespread evidence of fraud in Pennsylvania at all.
George, I have acknowledged that. I'm not aware of any widespread or any systemic fraud or anything of the sort. However, nobody can say with confidence that the ballots that are supposed to be segregated in Philadelphia are in fact being properly segregated, because even this morning I spoke with the Republican who's responsible for overseeing that process, and he continues to be denied access to the point where you can actually see what's happening. Yeah, they're in the room. The room is the size of a small town, and he can't get close enough to see what's actually going on. So all I'm saying is there are some unnecessary problems along the way. we're going to have to get this resolved.
Yeah, and one of the reasons this has taken so long, and it couldn't be done earlier, of course, was because the state legislature in Pennsylvania said that you couldn't start processing the absentee mail-in ballots until Election Day itself. I do take your point. But let's say we go through the process, we go through the canvassing, we go through the recount. Are you prepared to say, once that has happened, that this has been a fair and free election?
George, look. I voted for Donald Trump. I endorsed Donald Trump. The person that I want to be the next president is the person who wins the Electoral College legitimately. I think our system is absolutely going to enable us to do that, and I'm going to accept the results.
Senator Toomey, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go now to Mary Bruce. She's with the Biden campaign in Wilmington, Delaware. Mary, I know that the Biden camp has been having increasing confidence through the night. They now believe they have this?
George, they do. There is a growing sense within the Biden campaign that this is inevitable and increasingly imminent. We heard Joe Biden come out yesterday and all but declare that this race is over, and they are now extremely encouraged by what they are seeing in Georgia, and all eyes here this morning are on Pennsylvania. They predicted that we would see them growing in a lead actually at about this time, even based on their internal data, and they are extremely encouraged by what they are seeing. That said, they are continuing to urge patience, urging everyone to be calm. You've heard Joe Biden tweeting and saying, keep the faith. Biden saying democracy is messy and urging Americans to remember, despite what the president may say, that this is the process playing out as it should, that this is democracy at work. And that stark contrast with the White House is one that has been extremely notable. Despite the president's remarks last night, Joe Biden not responding directly, but his team does feel that the more the president comes out and makes these baseless accusations about voter fraud, the more he tries these legal maneuvers, they feel that that just underscores their argument that they believe they're winning.
Mary Bruce, thanks very much. To see you, Vega, with the White House. We're getting a statement this morning.
We're getting a statement, George, and the strategy by the campaign. It's a statement from the campaign, I should say, is the strategy is being laid out a very crystal clear way, and they are now starting to carry what the president has been saying for the last few weeks, which is raising questions about the integrity of the election. Interesting, this statement comes from the general counsel for the campaign, Matt Morgan. This is not someone that we have heard from since they started protesting the results of this election. Let me just read you some of the lines of it. It is a lengthy statement here. They say, quote, "This election is not over. The false projection of Joe Biden as the winner is based on results in 4 states that are far from final." And then they go on to tick off each of these states. They say Georgia is headed for a recount. We are confident we will find ballots improperly harvested. I'm going to fact check this as we go. There is no evidence of that yet. We have not seen any evidence. We have been saying if that is the fact, we would actually report that. But again, we have not seen any evidence of improperly harvested ballots in Georgia. They say in Pennsylvania, there were many irregularities. Volunteer legal observers were not allowed to have meaningful access to vote counting locations. We have heard repeatedly from Pennsylvania elections officials who have said this election has run smoothly, that they have seen no widespread irregularities there. The campaign says in Nevada, there appear to be thousands of individuals who improperly cast mail ballots. Again, this campaign has offered no evidence of that. The president mentioned this during his address last night. We have heard this from campaign officials, but they've offered zero evidence to back up that claim. Then they go on to say the president is on course to win Arizona outright, and they are blasting these news organizations that have already called the result of that election there. The president said that he wants to see this go all the way to the Supreme Court. We have seen the campaign file multiple, this sort of blitz of legal challenges, 3 of which have already been tossed out by the courts. And the strategy right now, George, really appears to be one where they're focused more on influencing public opinion rather than changing law or changing the case against them in the courts. And we are starting to see from our team some cracks in the ranks, at least in the circles close to the President Trump. People are not coming out and saying this publicly, but privately, some folks are starting to question the strategy, this legal strategy, as to whether this is the winning ticket and the way to go for the end result that the president wants.
And we will be keeping an eye on that all day. Thank you, Cecilia. I want to go to Nate Silver right now from 538. Nate, let's take a look at these states right now where the votes have started to come in. Pennsylvania, Georgia overnight give the lead to Joe Biden. What's your read first in the state of Pennsylvania? 130,000 votes out there right now. I think Joe Biden's lead has climbed to about 5,800 right now. How solid is that when you look deep into the numbers?
It's very solid. I do not think there's a path back for Trump. So far, these are all mail votes that are being counted. They've gone about 4-1 or 3-1 for Biden statewide. If you have them go 3-1 the remaining votes, he'd be up by about 70,000 votes, or about 1 percentage point. There are also provisional ballots in Pennsylvania, where in Pennsylvania, if you are sent a mail ballot, you say, I don't trust that to be counted, I'm going to go vote in person. It's a provisional vote. Those are very, very Democratic this year because Democrats were scared their votes wouldn't be counted. Those have not really been included in the count so far, so that will further increase Joe Biden's lead. I think there is not a path back for the president.
Georgia, much closer right now in automatic recount territory. Still have some votes out there, still have provisional military ballots out there.
Yeah, so Georgia's within what I would call the margin of surprise, right? It doesn't look like there's enough votes out there for Trump to come back, but you don't know how those military votes would go. I think that is within the recount threshold there, so there can be irregularities, not like the president's alleging, but there can be, tabulation errors. So it would be surprising if Trump won Georgia, but it's certainly reasonable to leave Georgia uncalled. It's a very close race.
Okay, I want to come back to you, and I want to come back to our team here, but right now we have Brad Raffensburg, the Secretary of State of Georgia, on the phone. Secretary Raffensburger, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're about to go do a press conference in your state. Can you just tell us how your count is going right now? Have you seen any irregularities? When do you expect to finish?
Good morning, George. Well, right now, at 9 a.m., we had 8,000 votes left in 4 counties, and we have 8,890 military ballots that are outstanding that will be counted if they are returned by the close of business today.
And have you seen any widespread irregularities, any strong evidence of fraud in your state so far, any counting of illegal ballots?
We are investigating every report we receive, but we also have an open process to make sure that we allow monitors into all elections so we're open and transparent.
How would you describe how your counting process has gone so far?
We don't count. The counties do that, and they're working diligently to get that thing done as soon as we can today. Obviously, we understand the national significance of Georgia, and we want to make sure that we defend the integrity of our election.
And has it been an election with integrity so far?
Well, that's what we fight for every day, and that's why if we hear about any situations, we investigate them.
Have you come upon anything, in that investigation, have you come upon anything that concerns you so far?
I would say probably it's too premature to really give you a defined answer on that right now. But we're so close, we understand because it's so close that the candidate that comes up a little bit short, within 0.5%, they can ask for a full recount, and we'll have a full statewide recount if it goes the way it looks like it's going to go.
And how long would that take?
Well, fortunately, it's putting all the paper ballots together, running them through the scanner. We'll get a timeline on for you. It's about 5 million votes that have been cast, and they'll have to all be scanned and tabulated.
And generally, in your experience, do recounts change the outcome? What is the margin of error usually?
We've never done a full statewide recount. This is the first time we'll be able to do this in 18 years because we now have a verifiable paper ballot. That was the new system we brought in 2019.
Secretary Raffensburger, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.
Okay, let me go back to Nate now. We just got through Georgia. You said that, as we talked about, that's likely to go to a recount. Very good chance it goes to a recount. Let's move out west to Arizona and Nevada. Starting with Nevada, Joe Biden's lead fairly solid at this point?
Yeah, I mean, again, we have mail ballots from Clark County, which is Las Vegas. Those have been very blue so far. It's a very blue county, so I would expect Joe Biden's lead to grow in Nevada.
And Arizona?
Arizona is where I think there has been some decent news for President Trump. He has been almost at the pace he needs in these late counted early ballots to catch up, maybe a little behind pace. There's some evidence that the remaining ballots are not going to be quite as friendly to him, but Arizona, out of these states, is the most in doubt, I think, actually.
Oh, that's interesting. So, but if you put it all together right now, you're seeing Joe Biden's the ceiling on electoral votes, 306. That's if he wins all these states we were just talking about.
Yeah. Well, and there's Alaska, which is uncalled technically.
Yeah, it's uncalled technically, but I want to get back to the broader picture. But I've been reading some analysis suggesting that Alaska may be a bit closer than it looks right now because so much of the mail ballot hasn't been counted.
Yeah, the Democratic Senate candidate there made a bold claim that he would catch up once the mail vote is counted, but it is a state where it's very slow to count the postal vote. You only have in-person votes so far. Those show all the Democratic candidates way behind, but we've seen these gigantic splits before between the mail vote and the in-person vote, and so you can't say anything for sure. I think it's going to be another few days before we get mail vote in there. So that's more important for the Senate, by the way. If Al Gross were somehow to win that race, Democrats would have 49 senators probably going into these runoffs in Georgia. So that's salient there. You know, whether Joe Biden wins or loses 3 electoral votes is probably not going to matter in the end.
But your bottom line is Joe Biden is going to get the electoral votes he needs, basically with Nevada and Pennsylvania, according to your analysis, 279 electoral votes.
That's the problem, right? If we woke up in 2 weeks and it turns out that Joe Biden has failed to win in Georgia and failed to win in Arizona, I would not be surprised. But Pennsylvania and Nevada are big problems for the president.
Nate Silver, thanks very much. Let me bring in Chris Christie right now. Chris, I was listening very closely to Senator Toomey when I was interviewing him just a few moments ago, and he was taking a distinctly different line from the White House. Yes, we're going to challenge. We're going to use every legitimate challenge we have. We want more transparency in the process. We're going to go through the recounts, but not suggesting that illegal ballots, that he has any evidence that illegal ballots have been cast so far.
No, because there is no evidence yet. And it's just exactly what I was saying last night. And I've been saying after those comments throughout the night and throughout this morning to people who have been calling me. If there is evidence, we need to see it. And if there isn't, then we have to stop indicting the system. And that's my issue. I brought lots of indictments as a prosecutor, George, and I didn't lose any of them. And the reason I didn't was because I looked at the evidence first, was convinced it was beyond a reasonable doubt, and then brought the charges. And I think one of the things you're seeing here is the absence of Don McGahn.
The former White House counsel.
Former White House counsel and campaign counsel for 2016. This race was just as close in 2016 as it is now. And there were recounts in 2016. And you never saw any of this mayhem because there was a legal strategy laid out and executed by a legal pro.
One of the ironies right now is if Joe Biden actually wins those 4 states in play, he's going to get 306 electoral votes, which is exactly what the president won in 2016.
Exactly. And I think that what you're seeing this morning and in the last couple of days, the scrambling of all these different filed complaints that are being dismissed and others that aren't showing success is it doesn't appear that prior to Election Day, they had someone quarterbacking the legal approach, laying out a plan and having people on the ground to execute that plan. I know from 2016 that Don McGahn had that plan and executed it. And he's one of the most qualified election lawyers in the country. He wasn't there this time because he left the White House and was distanced by people in the White House away from the campaign and the president. And so one of the things you're missing here, and the reason why folks like me don't have confidence in what's happening right now, is because we don't have anybody in charge of the legal process.
Who is running the show?
Listen, I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
U.S. history for 200.
I don't know, George. But what I will say is that the absence of Don McGahn is being felt by that campaign starkly in the last couple of days. And I think underestimated over the course of time. He's the guy who handled the Supreme Court nominations. He's the guy who handled some of the most difficult legal issues over these years that have gotten the president through it. So what we need now to know is there evidence? If there is, present it. If there isn't, stop.
I got to stop you there because we have the Democratic senator now from Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, with us as well. Senator Casey, thanks for joining us this morning. I was just talking to your Senate colleague, Pat Toomey, a few moments ago. Did not dispute that Joe Biden had gone ahead, still holding out some hope for the president. How do you see this vote going during the day?
Well, thanks, George. Good to be with you. I think that obviously the lead will grow. I don't know exactly where it will end up. I've been saying for a few days now that I thought in the official count, which could be 2 weeks down the road, which is very typical, that I think he'll be ahead by somewhere north or south of 100,000.
And that would be outside the scope of a recount, at least an automatic recount. On the issue of irregularities of the system so far, what have you seen? Senator Toomey was complaining about the transparency in Philadelphia, especially saying his people couldn't get close enough to tell that these ballots that were supposed to be segregated are in fact being segregated. Do you have any evidence that ballots that have come in after Election Day have been counted?
Well, first of all, the allegations of fraud are just the big lie. We know that. And we know that there are ballots that will be counted that came in after Election Day, the ones postmarked on Election Day. I think it's a rather small number, though. I can't say I know the exact number, but from at least one credible source that is very close to these numbers, the estimate was somewhere in the 10,000 range.
So you're confident that even as the votes come in today, when the recount is completed, say 2 weeks from now, that Joe Biden will have won the state of Pennsylvania and therefore is the next president of the United States?
Yes.
Senator Casey, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.
I want to go to Sarah Fagan right now. Sarah, picking up the conversation we were having with Christie right here. Pat Toomey seemed to be walking the same line that Mitch McConnell came out with a paper statement overnight. Every valid ballot must be counted. If there are illegal ballots, we'll investigate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all you can do as a Republican. You know, there is not evidence of widespread fraud, and it doesn't help any of these political leaders who want bright futures and long careers in politics to come out and say there is fraud when there's no evidence of it. Having said that, I agree wholeheartedly with Governor Christie. This campaign lacks a strategy, a legal strategy. It would have been far smarter to focus solely on Pennsylvania. The fact that perhaps, as Senator Toomey just said, Republicans are not being allowed to witness the ballots. I heard the same thing from somebody in Clark County last night who I spoke to on the phone. No Republican has been allowed in that counting center. That doesn't mean there's fraud, but it does raise concern. And you've got to lay some groundwork before you come out with a sledgehammer and allege widespread fraud. And the campaign has just failed to do that.
John Carl, at the White House, we saw the president certainly trying to spark outrage among Republicans last night with that statement, and some of his Senate allies have responded.
Some of his Senate allies have responded. They responded really after being basically dared or maybe threatened by the president's sons. You had both Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. go to Twitter to demand to know where the GOP is on this, where Republicans are, and saying that they would remember, and that anybody who was thinking about running for president, in Don Jr.'s tweet, needs to be heard from. And after that, almost on cue, you saw a few go on television, on Fox News in prime time. Josh Hawley of Missouri, Ted Cruz of Texas. We saw Lindsey Graham come out. Lindsey Graham actually even suggesting that maybe somehow the Pennsylvania legislature would, which is controlled by Republicans, would vote to select its own electors to send to the Electoral College. That's been ruled out now, by the way, by Pennsylvania Republican leadership in the state legislature, say that is not going to happen. But by and large, Republican leadership has been quiet. You talked about Mitch McConnell putting out a statement overnight. His statement's very short and to the point. He says every legal vote should be counted and any illegally submitted ballots must not. All sides must observe the process, and the courts are here to apply the laws, and the voting will go on. So Mitch McConnell, I got to tell you, George, I've been talking to Republicans behind the scenes on this, outside of the president's inner circle, who are basically saying the president's going to sound off, he's going to do his thing, but it's not really going to matter. It's not going to matter. The counting's going to go on. The Electoral College will determine the winner, echoing largely what Pat Toomey was saying to you.
John Carl, thanks very much. Terry Moran, in the last couple of days, have spoken with the Attorney General of Nevada, state officials in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, to a person. They say no evidence of widespread fraud whatsoever. So this isn't likely to go very far in the courts.
It's not. And one of the things that's developing in these courts is the judges are looking at what these cases are and literally laughing them out of court. The federal judge in Pennsylvania, a George W. Bush appointee, when the Trump campaign came in and said they're blocking us from any access to the count. And then it turned out, as the judge developed the evidence and the arguments, that in fact they were in the room. And so the judge, Paul Diamond, said, I'm sorry then, what's your problem?
Well, you heard Pat Toomey. He said they're in the room, but it's a big room. We can't get close enough.
They want to get closer, and the judge said, basically, go figure it out. Go like grown-ups. And sure enough, they decided they could get from 20 feet to 6 feet. They're still complaining. The problem that they've got with this kind of madcap litigation strategy that if you can call it that Chris Christie is pointing out, is that really the law is not your friend at this point, because the source of law in this country, and every judge knows it, are the votes of the American people. That's where the sovereignty lies. That is an ineluctable force that Donald Trump is going to have to deal with. And he better come up with better legal arguments than he's got right now, because right now judges are saying there's no evidence here. Get out of the court until you come back with something better. And they don't have it at this point.
And Matthew Dowd, one of the things you found, you're a veteran of the recount of 2000, is a place where the politics and law intersect. The candidate that has the lead has the advantage going into the courts.
Oh, 100% they have the advantage. And in many ways, the politics at this point is more important than what the legal arguments are that the president and his allies might want to be making in this. And this is a profoundly, George, more better situation for Joe Biden than was going on in Florida in 2000. Keep in mind, in Florida, when the official count was done in Florida, it was 900 votes, and it was the process of the recount that started diminishing that from 900 to 600, and I think it ended up somewhere in the range of 500 to 600, and then the count was stopped. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of votes, and it's not going to. We know what the margin is in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. My back-of-the-envelope math, and I was doing this in 2000, a lot of the back-of-the-envelope math, my back-of-the-envelope math, when I look at what's remaining, is Joe Biden's going to have upwards of a 60, 70,000 vote lead when all this is done in the unofficial count. That is a much different situation when you're dealing with 900 votes in Florida in 2000 and thousands of votes that Joe Biden has an advantage of this year.
Across several states. Yvette Simpson, when you look at this now from the perspective of Friday rather than Tuesday night, it turns out that the African-American community in Detroit and Philadelphia and Atlanta, in Las Vegas, all did come out for Joe Biden.
They did. And I do want to say that that was not without a lot of work. You know, we're talking a lot about Stacey Abrams and her work over the last decade in Georgia. Also, lots of organizing efforts from organizations like Black Voters Matter across all these states, Black Male Voter Project. There are a lot of organizations that are Black focused who have been doing this work through a pandemic to get people to come out, and they came out overwhelmingly. And I love that, and I'm excited that we're talking about that. I think the real question is, what does that look like now? How do we continue to serve those people? Ram and I have been talking about, you know, the real importance of delivering for Black voters in this moment who really showed up against all odds. And if you think about it, it's not that surprising, right? One, you know, African Americans are deeply, deeply impacted by this pandemic. The racial unrest that's happening, the war that Trump has caused, siding with white supremacists, emboldening white supremacists, has really motivated African American voters. And also that good old organizing that still works in communities, bringing out new voters. It's not just shifting demographics. It's expanding the electorate and going to places where we don't traditionally invest resources and getting those folks engaged and bringing them into the fold. And I just want to say, great effort in all of these cities, and I'm glad that we had this result.
So, Raman, what does Joe Biden do right now? It's looking like he's going to have, if this all keeps going in the same direction, somewhere between 279 and 306 electoral votes. Again, on the par with what President Trump had in 2016. Unlikely, at least until January, to have control of the Senate, diminished majority in the House. Lay out, if you were advising him right now, how to handle the next day, week, months.
One thing I want to confess, I decided today to work out to midnight train to Georgia. That's what I did all day. I just played it for 45 minutes. That's all I did before. If you have another song for Arizona or Nevada, I'm open, okay? 45 minutes is just midnight train to Georgia. Well, here's what I think will happen. You saw it yesterday. You're going to go from the politics of the count to the policy of a governing, and that will begin to shift. And you'll see his rhetoric continue to move that way, and to the assumption and now the assertion that he's going to be the next president. Second is, you got to take stock. I think one of the things the Democrats are going to have to be, and Biden's team is going to be aware of this, Bill Clinton wins in 92, 94, the Republicans take over the House. You have 06 gains for Democrats, 08 gains with Barack Obama, you lose control in 2010. How do you avoid the boom and bust of the Democratic Party? And if you look at it, and if you step back, I'm not trying to be an advocate, actually Trump did a little better with minority communities, and he stole some votes. Joe Biden
stole. Let's be careful with our language here.
He went behind. He got votes that traditionally Republicans don't get. Same thing with what Joe Biden just did. When you look at Arizona, you look at Nevada, you look at where he's winning in Georgia and Pennsylvania, he is doing better in areas Democrats traditionally don't get. And you got to look at the two Senate races in Nevada and Arizona and learn lessons. The other thing he's going to be conscious in this transition, and this goes back to 92 when Dwight Fowler lost but took 49%. You have a campaign still going on in Georgia, so what you're communicating nationally has a direct impact on those two Senate races. But he will govern in the tradition, and I will say this, remember after 2012, he went to negotiate with Mitch McConnell the tax bill for after the election. He has a working relationship of trust, not just with Mitch McConnell, but with other members of leadership. His message about bipartisan, I'm offering my hand. Are you ready to be a partner in this effort? And if it's just scorched earth, he'll have a different approach. But I think he will be cognizant of where his votes came from and what the country needs to continue to implement smart, progressive policies.
Heidi Heidkamp, Joe Biden, if he does indeed become president, when he becomes president, is going to have to bridge your wing of the party, moderates from the Midwest, with the vets, progressives across cities in America. How does he do it?
Well, I think he focuses on the real challenges that are today's challenges, which is the pandemic. And as much as I think that Joe has a relationship with the Senate Republicans, I think his real base of bringing the country together is with the governors. The governors are now experiencing this huge pandemic, this huge problem. They are in it with this president. I think there's a great way to build the kind of relationship that they need to build to then go into infrastructure, then go into economic work. And I think all of those actually fit within the progressive moderate. What we need to do doesn't have a label there. It has to be done in order to bring this country back to some semblance of governability.
Thank you, Heidi. I want to go back to Georgia right now. Gabriel Sterling, who's overseeing the election system in Georgia, is holding a press conference right now. Let's listen in.
We're going to go over the details again of where we stand on the vote counts. There have been some changes overnight and even changes from the time we walked from the front door of the office to the front of the cameras today. I'm Gabriel Sterling, the statewide voting system implementation manager. Good to see everybody here again this morning as we close in on a final tally. So the secretary just announced a particular set of numbers that actually went down from the time we walked from the door to here. So our new total that we are aware of right now is 4,169, and they are in a handful of counties. I'll go over those now. In Cherokee County, there are 150 ballots that they did not upload, so I had to rescan. They're uploading those today. There's 75 now in Cobb. There's 444 in Floyd. There's approximately 3,500 in Gwinnett as we went through the reconciliation process of what they had already reported versus what they had left to newly scan. And I think that's it. A couple of things. Lawrence County, the 1,769 votes we had yesterday, we were basing those on the absentee ballot differences. And when they looked and did their reconciliation process on it, they discovered that they had accidentally uploaded those into their election day totals. Their totals will not change, but the vote type will change when they make that change today. So outside of that, we don't have any other numbers that we are aware of. But again, I want to remind everybody, we have ballot curing processes through today for absentee ballots, verification process for provisional ballots, and we can still get any military or UACAVA ballots in by close of business today if they were postmarked on Tuesday, election day. So there are still an unknowable amount of ballots that would be available to be counted at some point. They are in the hands of the elections officials now, other than maybe the military and UACAVA ones. And I can assure you that there are teams of 20-somethings around the state who are Republicans and Democrats finding those people with those absentee ballots to cure. And they're going through that process in county by county, in ones and twos. And just to preempt a question, I know it's going to come up, are we seeing any widespread fraud? Are we seeing anything that makes us question the outcome of the election? We're not seeing any widespread irregularities. We're not seeing anything widespread. We are investigating any credible accusation with any real evidence behind it. But let me tell you one thing. When you have a narrow margin, little small things can make a difference. So everything's going to have to be investigated to protect the integrity of the vote. Our office intends to do that. And like I said, if you get a wide margin, it doesn't matter as much. A narrow margin, it does. We are literally looking at a margin of less than, a large high school. So we understand that in this state. The county officials are aware of that. Our investigators are aware of that. So it's an important thing to protect the integrity of this election from all sides. With that, I'll take any questions you'll have. Yes.
With the margin we have and with the certainty of a recount, are we going to know who won the presidency in Georgia by the end of November?
With the timeline we have laid out, essentially, let's go through the timeline again. So we should be able to know by the end of November because, remember, we have a mid-December deadline in order to seat electors. So the one thing that is always going to be an unknowable unknown is lawsuits that can affect what we have to do. We are a country and a nation of laws. So if a judge tells us to do something a certain way, we're going to have to do that, let the legal process work its way out. But given the laws we have
that's
now,
the situation in Georgia right now. Now I want to go back to Arizona. Whit Johnson is there. We're expecting some more votes to come in from Maricopa County later this morning.
George, that's right. I would keep your eye on Arizona because, as you mentioned, just within the next 30 minutes, we are expecting that next dump of results. And because the race is so close here, it could give us a clearer picture of what we're looking at. Let me give you a breakdown of the numbers right now. Joe Biden right now still leading Donald Trump by about 47,000 votes. Outstanding, there are roughly 260,000 ballots across the state. So if you do some rough math there, Donald Trump would have to get in the ballpark of 60%, maybe more, of the remaining votes to be able to overtake Joe Biden. Democrats this morning are telling us they are very confident because when you look throughout the state, you still have Pima County. That's a county that leans Democrat. There are still a number of ballots outstanding there, thousands of them. But the Republicans also point to Pinal County, where they also have several thousand ballots outstanding. So both sides are looking at the math and looking at the numbers very closely. And once again, it all comes down to Maricopa County. We've been saying this since before Election Day, the most populated county in the state, a county with shifting demographics, one of the fastest growing Latino populations in the country. So far, it has been leaning towards Joe Biden. And so that's what we're waiting to see in the next 30 minutes here, George.
Whit Johnson, thanks very much. Let's go to Matt Gutman. We're expecting some more votes in Nevada as well, Matt.
Yeah, about 50,000 mail-in ballots coming in about an hour and 20 minutes, George. Obviously, the Biden campaign is very expectant. They hope that this will give them a bigger cushion than they've had so far. This is not where they expect it to be 3 days after the election, with only 11,000 votes separating Biden and President Trump. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama handily won this state. So they're hoping this gives them a bit of breathing room. And as Whit mentioned, very similar situation here. They really need Nevada right now. It could give them some breathing room in general for the elections. Now, one thing we've been talking a lot about this morning is fraud. And people have been showing up at the election headquarters where we've been posted up for a couple of days. And there was one woman who had a death certificate of her father who died of COVID in August. She had a ballot that was sent to her house in October. She says this is evidence of fraud. And I think a lot of people are seizing upon what appear to be bureaucratic mistakes as evidence of wide-scale fraud. But when you're talking about, hundreds of millions of votes across the country, you're going to have some bureaucratic mistakes. In addition to that, there is this federal referral, a criminal referral sent to Bill Barr, the Attorney General, saying by the Trump camp, alleging that there are thousands of fraudulent ballots here. There was no evidence of that so far. In fact, the Las Vegas Sun said that the former Attorney General who filed that claim is basically trying to set fire to the U.S. and the state constitution, George.
Matt Gutman, thanks very much. Tom Yamas, let's come back to the conclusions that Nate was talking about just in the last hour about why he believes that Joe Biden has this. Start out by giving Joe Biden the two states that Nate is confident of, Nevada and Pennsylvania.
Okay, well, Nevada and Pennsylvania, he doesn't need both of those. But if he gets both of them, he's at 279. He's well past the 270 mark. He's on his way to the White House, George.
And then we still have at least two more states hanging out there.
We do. You have Georgia, which we've been talking about as well. If you give him Georgia as well, his number just keeps going up higher and higher. The problem here and the problem for the president is that if he doesn't win Pennsylvania, there's just not enough. The math doesn't add up. He gets to 259. There are still a lot of votes out there, George. Biden hasn't put the president in checkmate just yet, but the president is running out of moves.
So basically, we were talking before, he's got to hold on to Georgia, turn around Arizona, where Biden has a lead right now, and turn around Pennsylvania.
He needs Pennsylvania right now. It's really hard to do this math without Pennsylvania, unless he gets Nevada as well. But like I said, he's not in checkmate. He's looking at that board, and there's not a lot of moves left.
Tom Yamas, thanks very much. Let me bring Rick Klein, our political director. So, Rick, there's a universe. We think of about 130,000 votes out in Pennsylvania. We just heard Senator Bob Casey say he's confident that Biden is going to win it. Nate is confident that Biden is going to win it. Walk us through where the numbers are, why that is.
Yeah, so what our decision desk at ABC News is looking at is really the universe of two different types of votes right now. You mentioned that 130,000. About a third of them are probably from Republican-leaning counties. We're talking about counties in the western part of the state, Crawford, Beaver, Armstrong, Blair. Joe Biden has been winning pretty consistently in the mail-in vote, but those are Republican-leaning counties, so it's possible that Donald Trump makes up some portion of the pretty narrow lead right now. Of course, the lion's share of the outstanding votes are still from Democratic-leaning counties, so that's where you might expect Joe Biden to pad that lead. The other thing is that there's an unknown quantity of provisional ballots out there, and this is what happens when a voter goes to the polls and there's some question about his or her eligibility. You're allowed to fill out this provisional ballot. Now, that number is actually larger this year than probably ever before because so many voters in Pennsylvania and elsewhere asked for mail-in votes, and they may or may not have returned them. And so if you ask for a mail-in ballot and you don't return it and you decide to go to the polls, you fill out a provisional ballot. Now, you can't vote twice, of course, so there's some process that has to happen at the county level, but that's another universe of votes that's still lingering out there.
And the Biden campaign had been increasingly confident starting on Tuesday evening because they have a pretty good idea, sometimes down to the individual, often down to the individual, who got these absentee ballots, where they are, when they voted, whether they still need to be pushed to the polls.
That's right. They were modeling this from the very start, not just by party identification, but on the tendencies. And they have felt good about their numbers throughout. This has basically progressed as they said it would, which is to say that after Election Day, you saw that very large lead that looked on paper to belong to Donald Trump begin to evaporate. Not because votes came in late, not because anything nefarious happened, but because these votes came in early and because the counting was delayed until Election Day and beyond. This is exactly the situation that election officials said would happen. It's exactly the situation that we were preparing for in the weeks leading up to Election Day.
Mary Bruce, there was some hand-wringing among Democrats over the course of the campaign that Joe Biden was running something of a lackadaisical campaign, they said. He's staying too much in his basement. But the one lesson that was very clear that Joe Biden took from the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 was he is not going to ignore that blue wall. That is what is going to get his first, second, third, and 10th priority.
That was absolutely a lesson that was learned loud and clear in Georgia. All you had to do is look at where Joe Biden chose to spend time in the final week, the final 2 weeks, while he was also in those states that they were hoping to flip, those Trump states that they were hoping they could get to expand the map. They never were letting their eye off of these key battlegrounds, off of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the blue wall that they are now still keeping such a close eye on. And that's because they were keenly, acutely aware of the lessons learned 4 years ago. And so, while they had their team fanned out across the map, they were not going to let go of those states. And it also gets at the message that Joe Biden has been hammering relentlessly this entire campaign, digging in, especially in the last few weeks as he began to ramp up his campaigning more into his blue-collar roots, right? Telling his personal story over and over again because he thinks that Scranton versus, Wall Street message would really resonate, especially in those upper Midwestern states as he tried to regain some of those key blue-collar voters. George.
John Carl, the president paid attention to those states as well, and in fact, he did turn out his vote.
He did. He exceeded his vote total in many places, many of the key places he was targeting over 2016. He targeted Minnesota as well, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, spent much of his time there. And it has to be said, George, he also, even as he is losing these states, we don't know Pennsylvania yet, but even as he's losing Michigan, Wisconsin, even Minnesota, he exceeded expectations in each of them. And the margin is much tighter than a lot of people anticipated, and that much of the public polling suggested it would be.
Let me take that to Nate Silver. Nate, we've talked about this in the past, and there's going to be a lot of talk about this going into the future. As the days go on, the popular vote is going to end up being closer to where the public polls were. But you looked at the poll, most of the public polling in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin had greater margins for Joe Biden going in than he's going to end up with. Just to explain that, so we've now had 2 elections in a row where there was an error in the polling, maybe not as bad as it appeared on Tuesday night, but an error in the polling in the same direction favoring Joe Biden. It turns out that Donald Trump was getting more votes than pollsters were picking up.
I mean, we should wait for all votes to be counted. In Pennsylvania, when these provisionals come in, it could wind up being like a 3-point margin for Joe Biden, which is not that far from where the public polls were. In states like Minnesota, New Hampshire, the polls did fairly well. They did fairly well in the Southwest. But yeah, I'm not sure what it is about Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin, you had an 8 or 9 point lead for Joe Biden. He's going to win by 1 or 2 points or something like that. Iowa polls, except Ann Seltzer's poll did not, but most polls showed a closer race there. Ohio, maybe. So, it's a regional problem, it seems to me. In the South, Georgia, the polls were spot on. North Carolina, very close, right? Arizona, pretty good. Colorado. But in the Midwest, there's something that pollsters are not picking up upon. And, they're going to have to do a lot of digging to find out what that is.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that digging. Ram, you want in on this?
Yeah, I do think we got to think about this. Obviously, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the blue wall because of what happened in 2016. But there's 3 other pieces. That's been recreated. There is a Rocky Mountain blue wall that if Arizona and Nevada happen, that Colorado and New Mexico, that should not be lost. And I think when you look at North Carolina and Georgia, they're now starting to trend a little more like Virginia and less like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And you're getting regional breaks that I think tell you something if you actually have the right message with the right candidate that give you a different map. And I think, again, I want to say, FDR, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton knocked off incumbent president. This will be the 4th person, Joe Biden, to do it in over 100 years. This is really significant, but it's focused on Donald Trump.
I saw you shaking your head, at least something with Rob.
Yeah, because, he got to it at the end, which is it's candidate dependent. These walls that we talk about only exist if the candidates execute to be able to keep them there.
Demographics is not destiny.
Well, exactly. So when you say in the beginning that there's this blue wall here and this blue wall there, I mean, listen, when you were listening to Midnight Train in Georgia, I'm sure that was the fantasy going through your head. But a different candidate.
Actually not, just staying awake was.
Well, we could explore that later. But here's the thing. Those blue walls were supposed to exist. Hillary Clinton couldn't keep that blue wall. And I would say to you, it was candidate specific that Donald Trump appealed to them. Hillary Clinton didn't. I said to the president a year and a half ago, the toughest person in this field for you to run against is Joe Biden, because Joe Biden will appeal to white, college-educated, suburban voters in the blue wall. You don't want Biden. You want anybody but Biden.
I want to bring Yvette Simpson in on this point. I know you were a supporter of Elizabeth Warren, I believe, and also Bernie Sanders, the more progressive wing of the party. Are you prepared to accept now that the Democratic voters in the primaries made the right choice, that Joe Biden was the strongest candidate, given how close it is right now in this general election?
I believe that you win what you organize for. And I want to be clear that I think these wins that we're seeing, particularly with black and brown voters, is because we actually organized voters. And I think even though Hillary Clinton, people say, was not the best candidate, part of the challenge was there was not an organizing effort. We did not organize voters the way that we did here. And so I think part of the Democratic Party's strategy is talk about issues. Don't shy away from talking about issues. You don't have to use words or phrasings that might be polarizing. Talk to people about health care, though. Talk to them about income inequality. Raise those issues and be really clear about it, because they are kitchen table issues that cross many, many boundaries. And number 2, actually organize your voters. Don't talk about likely voters. We've expanded the electorate from folks who weren't being polled, weren't being considered, because we went out to folks who don't get engaged, use the resources and time to do that. If we do that, we win every time, regardless of the candidate.
Mary Alice Parks, I know you spent a lot of time covering the progressive wing of the Democratic Party during those contentious primaries.
Yeah, and I'm just not convinced that folks like Bernie Sanders are going to see these results the same way. There's a lot of data here, and you can pick apart a story that works for your narrative. And I think that part of what progressives are going to cling to is that the urban centers delivered in the end. And does that mean that actually Joe Biden spent a lot of time trying to reach out to an Obama-Trump voter that didn't come home, and that actually we're going to spend the next 2 years talking a lot about some Romney-McCain-Biden voter. Like Governor Christie said, that's sort of we know, probably college-educated in a wealthier suburb, and then balanced out with really diverse urban centers. I'm just not convinced that progressives are going to view this conversation the same way that Rahm Emanuel was talking about. And I would also say that Democrats are still going to have an incredible struggle with young voters from these coastal cities. They're going to look at some of this gap in the representation. They're going to look at that popular vote. They're going to cling to that. And they're going to say, 4 million votes isn't something that should be sneezed at. That's a third of states in this country have fewer than 4 million people in it. I think that there's going to be this growing conversation still about whether California and New York are underrepresented in this process.
That's not.
I think it's important. I actually think Bernie and I don't agree, come from the same wing of the party. I think Elizabeth Warren deserve a tremendous amount of credit. Unlike in 2016, they were very focused on a singular goal, winning. Our differences, we'll deal with that later, et cetera. And now Bernie and I and Elizabeth and I do get along, but forget that. They were incredibly pragmatic, where in 2016, Bernie did not do that for Hillary. And that's a statement. They understood we will work out progressive policy after we win. The election is the key.
Sarah Fagan, the same can be said for the Republican senators and House members who saved their seats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, if you're the Trump campaign and you're serious about the president wanting to run for election in 2024, which is kind of crazy to probably all of us sitting here right now, but they're already making those moves. You've got to do some real soul searching, which is in Wisconsin, Donald Trump underperformed congressional candidates. That almost never happens.
We want to bring in the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. She's starting to speak now at the Capitol.
I'll say to Americans, take a look at what I had to say this morning.
With Mitch McConnell's voice and Nancy's picture.
Mark Bernstein, help me out here. Are we going to be able to hear this? Sir?
It's midnight to train.
Say it again. Okay.
Nancy Pelosi and hearing Mitch McConnell, that is probably the last time that is ever going to happen. I want to bring in Heidi Heitkamp right now because you wanted to weigh in on this issue of the Republican Senate seats the Democrats did not flip.
You know, what's really interesting is we're talking a lot about the progressive versus the more moderate wing. But I think that the real soul searching that the Democratic Party needs to do is we really believe that Donald Trump was the worst president in this century, but yet millions and millions of Americans voted for him. What was that, and how do we begin to develop a national party persona? Because we can't win Senate seats and we can't win these swing districts and House seats unless we develop that kind of dialogue with these voters. And so, yes, it's great, great victory for Vice President Biden, but we absolutely need to dig into these numbers and figure out how we bring this country together regionally in places like North Dakota, South Dakota, where we used to reliably elect Democratic candidates.
Heidi, thanks. And I want to bring Terry Moran in on this. I'm looking up at that map right now, seeing all that blue in the middle of the country, and then these pockets, the red in the middle of the country, these pockets and cells of blue in various regions, and reflecting on, before we got into this election, it was pretty clear that if you asked the people supporting Donald Trump who's going to win the election, they said, well, Donald Trump, of course he's going to win. There's no question he's going to win. They'd be shocked if Joe Biden can win. The same would be said. Democrats might have been fearful that Donald Trump would win, but they couldn't believe that they were living in a country that could elect Donald Trump. That is a problem for whoever is elected president.
Absolutely. And it goes to something that some polls have found, which is that if you ask Republicans to describe the political positions of Democrats, they describe someone who's way farther to the left than most Democrats actually are. And if you ask Democrats to describe the political positions of Republicans, they describe extreme Republicans, and most aren't that way. And that goes to this great sort that it may be that while we are divided on important issues, we are less divided than we are distant from one another. We don't know each other anymore. And one of the things we heard Joe Biden say the other day is, we will see each other once again. This distance between us, we catastrophize the other side. And that is really a big problem because it's geographical as well as cultural. And that is a very hard thing for a president.
Certainly is. We'll be talking about that more during the days and weeks ahead. Coming up at 11 o'clock here on the East Coast, let's reset for everybody where things stand right now. You look at the electoral votes right now. Joe Biden has 253 electoral votes in states we have projected so far, 22 states. Donald Trump, 214 electoral votes, 23 states won. But over the course of the evening, Joe Biden has pulled ahead in the states of Pennsylvania, Georgia. He's still ahead in the states of Arizona and Nevada. If you look at the states where he is ahead right now, he has more than the 270 electoral votes he needs to become the next president of the United States. That's where things stand in this hour. Still not enough vote in to project those outstanding states, but Joe Biden is ahead right now. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, we now do have her. She's giving a press conference on Capitol Hill. Let's listen in.
Good morning, everyone. I wish we weren't wearing masks so we could see how exciting it is to come before you today with Joe Biden having the tremendous mandate that he has, and that pretty soon the hyphen will be gone from Vice President to President-elect Joe Biden. It's a happy day for our country because Joe Biden is a unifier, because he is determined to bring people together, because he respects all points of view, and as he has said, I ran as a Democrat, I'll govern as president for all of the people, whether they voted for me or not. So I am so officially pleased with the outcome that is imminent, and also personally delighted because of the quality and caliber of leadership that Joe Biden will provide. This morning, it is clear that the Biden-Harris ticket will win the White House. His election is historic, propelled by the biggest vote ever in the history of our country, 73.8 million and counting Americans, the most votes ever received by any presidential ticket in history. President-elect Biden has a strong mandate to lead, and it will have a strong Democratic House with him and many Democrats in the Senate. This has been a life or death fight for the fate of our democracy, as he says, the soul of our country. We did not win every battle in the House, but we did win the war. In 2018, we won 40 seats, 30 or 31 of them in districts where Trump had won before. They were in Trump districts. In preparation for the 2020 election, I said to people, you have to help us. They said, oh, you've won. Let's just do the Senate and the White House. And no, we won in districts, Trump districts, with Trump not on the ballot. In the next election, he will be on the ballot, and that makes winning those districts a steeper climb. I'm pleased that we've overwhelmingly won those districts, not all of them. Not all of them. But next time, he won't be on the ballot. It's one of the reasons we were able to win so many seats was because of the caliber of leadership of our members. Some of them won, a few did not, all of them excellent. And I hope that some of them will consider going at it again. As you all know, the right to vote is a sacred right in our country, and having that vote counted as cast is the foundation of our democracy. So we must be patient. I said to people, be calm. I said this Monday, Tuesday, be calm, be confident, be patient. And the votes are tallying, the races are called. We look forward to continued victories in House races. We have some out there. And we look forward to progress for the people, which was our agenda in 2018, continues to be for the people. Lower health care costs, bigger paychecks by building infrastructure of America in a green way, cleaner government, H.R. 1, which will be the first on the agenda in January. Again, it will be H.R. 1. While we prepare for the new Biden administration, we must also move swiftly for a new coronavirus relief bill. To continue that, we want the Republicans to come back to the table, the White House, the leadership, whatever. 100, for 2 days in a row, over 100,000 cases were reported. The imperative to act could not be greater. Over 9.5 million, nearly 9.5 million people infected, nearly 250,000 deaths, and tens of millions on unemployment. Again, I'm calling on the administration to come back to the table. Congress is also committed to passing an omnibus appropriations bill. This is the core of our work in the lame duck, when we don't have a pandemic killing hundreds of thousands of people and infecting millions, and making people food insecure, housing insecure, and the rest. But our responsibility to keep government open, to have an omnibus bill, and we intend to do that, not a CR. And we want to be able to do so in a way that gives confidence that we will have government open and continue to be, rather than having a CR. So, sadly, instead of crushing the virus, it appears that the Trump administration will use its final moments in office as a desperate last step to destroy every possible protection for American health and well-being. So many people have said to me, and perhaps some of you along the way,
there we have
what
House Speaker Nancy
damage do you
Pelosi saying a
think that Trump
coronavirus
will
bill
do
is still
between
a
losing
top
the
priority
election
for
and the
the House Democrats in the wake of what she says is a Joe Biden victory. I want to go bring that to Mary Bruce. Of course, you cover Capitol Hill every single day. The politics so dicey there. We saw in the negotiations between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin of the Trump administration in the days leading up to the election that Senate Republicans were not going to go along with anything they were negotiating. Any sense that that could change now?
I mean, they are still just fundamentally completely apart on what they want here. The two sides cannot agree on how much money to spend and on what to spend it on. We know that Republicans, Mitch McConnell actually just spoke to reporters, and he still seems to be, eyeing a smaller, more targeted deal than the $2 trillion package that Democrats have been eyeing all along. Mitch McConnell, has in many ways taken a bit of a backseat in some of these negotiations, letting House Speaker Pelosi work this out with the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin. But McConnell has made clear he does want to get this done by the end of the year. You hear Speaker Pelosi saying that is going to be the top priority. The two parties agree they need to do something. And George, I just don't think we can lose sight of the fact that there are millions of Americans across this country desperately looking to Washington for some kind of economic help, some kind of lifeline. Those lifelines that they passed earlier in the spring have all run dry, essentially. They agree they have to do something, but they just have not been able to bridge this gap now for months. It is going to be the top priority when they get back to Washington. But they do also have a lot of other big item things that they need to accomplish. You heard Speaker Pelosi mentioning that funding deadline that is on December 11th. They have until then to try and avoid a government shutdown. I think both parties have a vested interest in avoiding that as well. But they would also potentially be tackling a transition, possibly cabinet appointments. And of course, there's always a question about what would happen with the Supreme Court, George, which is headed to this, what could be a seismic decision just 1 week from now, George.
On the Affordable Care Act. I want to bring in Cecilia Vega. You've covered the president every step of the way these last 4 years. Even if Joe Biden is the president-elect, he will still be president until January 20th. I wonder how engaged he will be in negotiations, say, over a COVID relief bill, a funding bill.
It's been head spinning up until this point as to where he even stands on that, because he sent his party into kind of a free fall with Twitter mixed messages on that front. If I were to predict what the next couple of months will look like in terms of President Trump's engagement, President Trump's messaging, I think for the foreseeable future, we are going to continue to hear him sow discord in terms of the vote results that are coming in, and or when a decision is declared, he will be sticking to these legal arguments and the fights that his team is waging right now. And then I would imagine we will see a lot of Twitter activity over the next few weeks from the president himself. But George, I want to go back to something that Nancy Pelosi just said there, which I think really strikes at where we are in our country right now. She said that we are in a life or death fight for the fate of our democracy. And we're not just talking opponents on both sides at this point. We are talking about two extremes like I've never seen in my lifetime before. You've got the Democrats who think this is a life or death fight. You've got Trump supporters who are listening to the words that he is saying and think this election is being ripped out from underneath them and stolen, despite the base that there is no evidence to support that. These are not just two sides who see difference politically right now. They are two sides who think the other is fundamentally evil and fundamentally wrong for this country. I was just looking at this poll that was taken last month about Virginia voters, and they said 31% of Biden supporters said they would not accept a Trump victory as legitimate. 26% of Trump supporters are unwilling to accept a Biden victory. Whoever the next president of this country is, whether it is Biden or a re-election of Donald Trump, it seems like the very first order of business will be to figure out a way to to try to start this dialogue of bringing this country back together. So much easier said than done given where we are right now.
Job number one, of course, the votes are still being counted. All the votes are not yet in. Let's take another look at where things stand right now. I want to put up a board right now that shows the state of the race. It gives a pretty good idea of what has to happen right now. Biden needs to win 2 of those 5 states you see right there: Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Donald Trump will need 3 plus Pennsylvania. Tom Yamas, let's go back to the board.
Yeah, and we can just, we can show viewers, because you're hearing a lot of numbers, you're hearing about really tight margins, but when you look at the board, it kind of puts it all into perspective. And the one thing you need to know right now is that if Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, where he currently has a very small lead, around 6,000, it's game over. He gets to 273. All he needs is 270. Now, if we talk about the president has to win. He has to win Pennsylvania, then North Carolina, then Georgia, and then he has to come out west and either win Arizona or win Nevada. The problem is right now where the vote stands, it doesn't look like he's going to have that path. But to talk about Joe Biden can also do it with Nevada and Arizona. The president's at 268, Joe Biden's at 270. So at this day, and George, we've been doing this map 3 days in a row now, but it tells the story. The paths are the same. Joe Biden has more paths. The president has a very, very narrow path to victory. And as we report, as more votes coming in, that path gets narrow and narrower.
Sure does. Tom Yamas, thanks. And more votes are coming in. They're coming in now in the state of Arizona. Let's go get those from Whit Johnson. Whit?
George, we're just looking at these numbers right now. Again, these are from Maricopa County, the most populated county in the state. And once again, Donald Trump is chipping away at Joe Biden's lead bit by bit. Biden right now statewide is up by about 43,000 votes. He was at 47,000 votes just about 20 minutes ago. Statewide, Biden is leading about 50% to 48.6%. And again, there are still some results trickling in from some of those other counties, so that has been shifting as well. Around 200,000 outstanding ballots still statewide. So once again, the margin shrinking, but just a little bit, because if you look at what's left of those remaining ballots, President Trump still needs about 60%, maybe even more, to be able to overtake Joe Biden down this final stretch. We're still trying to look and see what's outstanding in Pima County. That's generally a county that leans Democrat, Tucson, and Pinal County, one that the Republicans have pointed to. And so if there's some balance shift there, that could make the difference down the stretch. But I can tell you that the clock is ticking here on President Donald Trump in the state of Arizona. And regardless what happens, if you look at it big picture, this was a solidly red Republican state for so many years. A Democrat has not won in a presidential election here since 1996. Before that, you go all the way back to 1948. Now, with the shifting demographics, the increasing Latino population, people moving here from other states like California, this state is becoming solidly purple. And not just for this election, but the foreseeable future. If you look at the Senate race as well, Mark Kelly is trending a little bit higher than Joe Biden. So potentially we could have 2 senators from Arizona going to the Senate for the first time since 1953 as well, George.
Whit Johnson, thanks very much. Let's bring this to Nate Silver. If you're looking at those 5 states that are still outstanding, I think you gave North Carolina, Donald Trump had the best chance of holding. You thought Arizona was second. What do these new votes tell you?
So these were really bad news for Trump. He won these ballots by only about 6 points. Remember, Whit said earlier you need about a 20-point Trump margin, and it's a lot of votes, too, about 60,000 votes. So I've been an optimist on the Trump comeback in Arizona. That was really bad news for Trump. I think Biden is the more likely winner now in Arizona.
So now you think he's the more likely winner in Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia.
And Georgia. So the different corners of the map, northeast, southeast, southwest. So, I mean, that Arizona batch was just quite bad news for Trump.
Which brings him to 306 electoral votes, exactly what Donald Trump got in 2016.
That seems like the most likely scenario. I mean, North Carolina will not know about for a while, same with Alaska, but we might land right on 306, exactly.
David Muir, what a remarkable outcome that would be, basically taking the 2016 map and just flipping it a little bit.
And going in, if he's elected, with more of a mandate than it looked like just 24 hours ago, certainly. And I think that the story, if Joe Biden is declared the president-elect, about Joe Biden will be his own coalition. So much talk about the Obama coalition. I think you're going to have to take a look at who Joe Biden was able to bring into the fold here. And there are some through lines through all of these battlegrounds, no matter what region of the country you're talking about. We look at the map and we can see the blue wall back up there, Wisconsin, Michigan. He's in the lead, obviously, as we've been reporting here in Pennsylvania. Georgia, what he's been able to do in Georgia, it would appear. And as we just heard from Whit, the possibility, and Nate saying the possibility of Arizona, Nevada, all across the country. And take a look at just some of the numbers out of Pennsylvania. And they mirror, George, what we've been talking about in so many of these states. Independent voters are going to be a huge part of this election when all is said and done. 51% of independent voters in Pennsylvania went with Joe Biden, to 43% for Donald Trump. And that dividing line in the country about whether to deal with the pandemic first, before the economy, before simply reopening the country. In Pennsylvania, 54% said we have to contain COVID. And then when you break it down, how did you vote? If that's how you look at things, 85% of people, and this we saw over and over again, who thought we must deal with this virus first before we can move forward, went with Joe Biden. A couple of other things. In the suburbs, still very strong support for Donald Trump in the suburbs across this country, but Joe Biden was able to peel away some of that suburban support. He was able to bring some Republicans over to his side, and suburban women, look at this. 53% went with Joe Biden, so he really made up ground among suburban women in this country. There are a lot of things on social media this morning. One of the things, Hillary Clinton tweeted a thank you to Stacey Abrams for what you're seeing in Georgia. There had been a lot of talk about what we saw in Miami-Dade early on, some softness among the Latino vote and among African Americans in this country. But given the numbers in Georgia, you have to give Joe Biden credit, and certainly Stacey Abrams, for her organizing efforts in Georgia if he's able to pull this out. And Joe Biden is going to deserve a lot of credit for bringing people from the other side, talking about his working class roots from the very beginning, the scrappy Joe from Scranton. That is really how he was able to rebuild that blue wall and take it elsewhere as well in bringing people into the fold, George.
David Muir, thanks. Martha Raddatz, you spent a lot of time going across the country during this campaign as well. COVID was on everyone's mind, but very different reactions depending on the part of the country you're from.
Exactly. You could cross into a typically red state and the masks were gone. There was almost an arrogance about that. And you could cross into a blue state and the masks were on. It's on everyone's mind. But honestly, George, I was surprised about how many people were out, especially in the cities. Crowded, very crowded, as if we're just going on with our lives, COVID or not. So that was definitely on people's mind. What I'm really looking at, so interested in now, and David's point about Joe Biden and his roots, and especially in Pennsylvania, spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania as well, is sort of healing the country if Joe Biden does indeed become the next president. I think probably that Republican Senate will help those who supported Trump see that Joe Biden has to reach across the lines, that he has to work with Republicans. I think probably if it was a Democratic sweep, it would be more difficult for Joe Biden to heal the country. But I've already gotten lots of texts from people who are hugely disappointed, Trump supporters hugely disappointed. But I don't see any real outrage. Yes, there are some people talking about conspiracies and they should count every vote, and they believe what the president said yesterday, and some of them don't even seem outraged by those baseless accusations that the president made. But at the same time, they sort of turned down the heat and said, look, if they get this done and Joe Biden's the president, I may not like it, but I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, I was going to say, Martha, even the sporadic protests we've seen in places like in Nevada and Arizona didn't seem to have a tremendous amount of energy behind them.
They really didn't. I mean, that is just the absolute hardcore. And you're going to have the hardcore. And I think you will see, some militias kind of go to ground about this and pop up later. But I think law enforcement would be tracking that very, very carefully. But generally, all of the people, I talked about this before, but to me, the moment about how the country will move forward is the man in Ohio who told me that he thought Donald Trump walked on water and there was nothing he could do to dissuade him from that, and that he was really upset that Donald Trump started talking about fraud in the election. That to me indicated what a lot of that base might think.
You fight hard
at some point, yeah.
Fight hard up until the election, but when it's over, it's over. Let the votes be counted and declare the winner.
Exactly, and that's what I've seen just talking to some voters who really do at this point, see that Joe Biden is the likely next president.
Martha, thank you. The votes are still being counted. I want to go up to Eva Pilgrim in Pennsylvania, and Joe Biden increasing his lead just a bit.
Yeah, some new numbers, and Joe Biden is up by about 9,000 votes. There's still about 120,000 ballots that still need to be counted. And George, I just want to talk about what's going on inside the room where the ballots are being counted here in Philadelphia, because that is something that we keep hearing people talk about. Those barricades separating the observers from watching the ballot counters. This is what I have been told, that there were about 15 Republican ballot watchers that have been in that room. The barricades were originally set back about 10 feet from where all the activity was going on, and that was in accordance with what was state law for poll watchers. Now, they went to court. Trump's campaign and the GOP went to court, argued to move those forward. They did move them forward to 6 feet because that is the current COVID regulation. We all are very well aware of the fact that that is the recommendation, that people stay 6 feet apart from each other because this country is in the middle of a pandemic. And we have reached out to city officials. This morning, one of the city commissioners confirming for us that the ballots are indeed being segregated that arrived after Election Day. Those ballots have not been counted. And George, I just want to point out, the commissioner that confirmed that for us is a Republican, Al Schmidt. He is the vice chairman of the commission. He says those ballots have not been counted and they are segregated here in Philadelphia. And I think that's just really important for people to understand. You know, this is a blue stronghold. This is a Democratic stronghold in the state, but there are Republicans and Democrats working on counting those ballots inside that room. Those people have been counting around the clock. They just want to get the votes counted so that there is a total that people can look at, George.
I'm glad you clarified that because Senator Toomey had earlier in the day suggested that perhaps some of those ballots were being counted. Eva Pilgrim, thanks very much. Let's go to Steve Osunsami now in Georgia, where, of course, Joe Biden now has the lead as well.
Yes, George, one of the discussions that's happening right now is all about the recount. We know that the recount in Georgia is not automatic. One of the candidates has to request a recount, and that recount can take place if there's less than 0.5% of the total votes in this race between the two, and right now that looks to be the case. The Secretary of State here, who, again, I underline is a Republican, talked yesterday that he had already ordered equipment to process this recount, that he was anticipating this. That recount can't be requested, George, until after they certify this election. They're hoping that they can do that before the deadline in November later this month. But that's where they think that this is going to end up going, is to a recount. Now, I will say that the tone from the Secretary of State's office is a little different today, but yesterday when he talked about this, he shared that he didn't believe that the numbers would change that greatly based on the way that elections are run here in Georgia. And I'll also underline again the points that he has made over and over again about the security measures that have been taken in this election, which seems to contradict any allegations that there was widespread fraud that took place in Georgia.
Steve Osunsami, thanks very much. I want to bring in the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, right now. Mayor Bottoms, thank you for joining us again. Last time we spoke, you were just recovering from COVID. You're feeling okay now?
Yes, thank you, George.
And I take it you're feeling even better with the numbers you've seen overnight.
This is incredible. I knew that we were here, but to see it happen is, and especially this year in Georgia, we lost John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and Joseph Lowry, and to see people line up around this state and cast their vote and make their voices heard is really what they fought so hard for. So I'm grateful that we're here in this state, and I'm grateful for Joe Biden for believing that Georgia could go blue.
How confident are you that that lead is going to survive the counting of the provisional ballots, the counting of the military ballots, the recount?
Well, we know the military ballots traditionally go toward the Republican Party, but of course this has been an interesting year with Donald Trump and the military, so I don't believe the numbers will be as high as we normally see them. But I'm confident that the numbers will stand. It's going to be a thin margin, but we're used to tight elections in this state. 3 years ago, I won by 832 votes. So we've seen this in the state before. I'm confident that it will stand, but I do think it's going to be a close one.
And so far, I mean, as mayor, have you seen any indication of any widespread fraud, any irregularities in the ballot counting?
No, I have not. The challenges that we had to do very early on in early voting, what we saw with the long lines and the glitches, but after that, it really was a very smooth process. I've not seen any irregularities as it relates to the vote count. I've not heard of any concerns regarding that, any credible concerns. I think that a recount is appropriate, and if that gives people the confidence of the integrity of the election, that's exactly what we need to do.
Even if Vice President Biden does survive the recount, there's going to be no rest for all of you in Georgia. It's looking like you're going to have 2 Senate runoffs in early January, January 5th.
Yep, and it's gonna be a tough fight. We know, again, traditionally Republicans outvote us in runoff elections, but I'm really optimistic that as people see the impact that Democrats have had across this state on this election, that people will be motivated to turn back out in January. And we're just going to keep reminding people that it's not over, that for Joe Biden to truly be successful as president, he's going to have the Senate with him.
Usually you have a lot of fatigue set in after a presidential election.
Well, we got energy in this state because so many people didn't think that we would be here. And to see that we are here, I believe is really going to motivate people to continue to press forward through January. So we're celebrating, and it may be a bit premature, obviously, because the state has not been called for Biden. But the fact that we're even having this conversation about Georgia is something to celebrate.
Mayor Bottoms, thanks for joining us again this morning.
Thank you.
We have some news out of Arizona. We can now say that Mark Kelly, the Democrat in Arizona, will win the special election in the state of Arizona, defeating Martha McSally. Because this is a special election, he could be sworn in by November 30th in this lame duck session. There you see now Democrats have picked up 2 seats on the Republicans, Arizona and Colorado. Republicans have picked up a seat in the state of Alabama. Yvette Simpson, that means these 2 Senate runoffs in the state of Georgia are all important.
They are critical. And I do agree with Mayor Bottoms that I think the effort and the energy continuing in Georgia is going to happen because people in Georgia know not only could they be credited with winning the presidency in this way, but they could also be credited with winning the Senate, which is so critical. I don't know that whether Georgians are more upset with Trump at this point than they are with Mitch McConnell, but once we start to spin the messaging to say we can also take Mitch McConnell out of the power seat, I think we're going to get people really fired up.
Sarah Fagan, you know Mitch McConnell is going to be all in on those special elections.
Yeah, he's going to have to be because the majority is at stake. And we're going to see a replay of the campaign that just occurred. You know, Democrats, if they control the Senate, they're potentially going to pack the court. They're going to move to a more aggressive climate policies. They're going to move to more spending. Joe Biden has said he wants $4 trillion of tax increases. If Mitch McConnell is removed as the Senate leader, that will likely happen. That's the debate that's going to take place in Georgia.
Rahm Emanuel, Joe Biden's going to have to deploy a lot of resources. Those 2 seats could make all the difference at the beginning of his presidency.
Without a doubt. And so 2 points. One, in 1992, in the transition when gays in the military were coming up, that bill, the debate around Bill Clinton's policy affected White Fowler's ability in the runoff. Second, in the call yesterday in the House, I think a number of moderates from the 2018 class were saying, why do I have to defend charges about socialism, other issues, Green New Deal? So you have a race that is going to continue coming out of obviously Joe Biden's going to look to the administration, but there's a lot at stake for his agenda and progressive politics in those 2 states in Georgia. And I think that, therefore, conscious of history, conscious of what just happened, they have to not only look forward there, but keep it one eye on right on the periphery of how to run this race in Atlanta and Georgia, create an environment that's more conducive for Democratic candidates.
Chris Christie, what role does President Trump play in these special elections, if any?
It just depends on what happens from here with his election challenges. And then depends once that ends, whether the president decides he wants to play a role or he doesn't. And I don't think anybody can predict that. I would say, though, on the special elections, Mitch McConnell's already had the toughest races he's going to have. To save Susan Collins in Maine, to save Tom Tillis in North Carolina, which no one thought was going to be able to happen. You know, all of us, I think, were pretty confident that Hickenlooper would win in Colorado and Kelly would win in Arizona. Neither one of them is a surprise. So I think he's got 2 good candidates in Georgia, in David Perdue and in Kelly Loeffler. And Mitch McConnell typically in his career doesn't lose these. So that'll be very, very interesting to watch, but he'll be in charge.
John Carl?
Republicans are confident in both of those races. They think that they have a better chance. They perform better in Georgia in runoffs. Runoffs are not unusual in Georgia. They think they perform better in runoffs than they do during the general election. And they also think that if Joe Biden is the president-elect, that helps them because it helps them make the argument that to elect Republicans to be a check on the power of the Democrats, to keep a Republican check against all the things that that Sarah was talking about: big tax increases, Green New Deal, environmental movements. So, who knows? I think that will be the center. Georgia will be the center of the political universe there because those two seats will determine the control of the Senate. But Republicans like their chances in that.
I would say to counter Rahm's point, double down on what worked in Georgia. Raphael Warnock is a progressive candidate. He did not run away from issues. He leaned in. And he has got as good a chance on this, and actually probably a stronger chance than Jon Ossoff. So we're going to have a moderate and a progressive both running races. We're going to come together and do this work and let the Georgia folks lead like they did here. Continue to organize the same voters, get them back out.
I have to say, I've already seen the Raphael Warnock ad that he's put out showing himself eating pizza with a fork, and they say, don't like puppies. He said, but get prepared for everything they're going to be saying about me in this special election. I want to bring in Mary Alice on this as well. We saw the role that Stacey Abrams played in this presidential election. She's going to be engaged in these Senate races as well.
Absolutely, and she's going to get a lot of credit for Democrats hitting this high water mark here in Georgia. I've spoken to Stacey Abrams several times this fall, and she comes back to this idea that the easiest way to suppress the vote is to tell people their vote doesn't matter. And so she's been methodically working on programs that help give people confidence in their own vote. Systems like letting folks track their ballot if they mail it in, letting them cure their ballot if there's an issue. I asked her, isn't that asking quite a lot of a voter to go through all of those steps? And she said it's actually really about something bigger. It's about telling people they can trust the system and that their destiny is in their own hands with their ballots. And on Warnock, I will say there was another ad, actually, that went really viral when he talked about racial issues and racial inequality in such a personal way. He had this ad where he said that he was accused of shoplifting as a kid because he had his hands in his pockets walking through a grocery store. And I think that we're going to see those issues of racial justice just at the forefront of that race again in the conversation in Georgia.
It's going to be fascinating to see, David Muir, the turnout in these special elections and whether the composition of the electorate is the same in the presidential race and the Senate races.
Yeah, and if it's even similar to what we're seeing in the presidential race, it's extraordinarily encouraging for Democrats. We've known the demographics were changing in Georgia for some time, and when would we have this shift? Obviously, if Joe Biden is declared the winner in Georgia, it's the first time, as you've been pointing out, since Bill Clinton in '92. And in addition to Stacey Abrams' machine that's now apparently warmed up, I mean, she didn't win with it, but she almost did. And Joe Biden looks like he's on his way to victory. And here's some of the numbers, George. This is really interesting. White voters made up fewer than 3 in 5 votes in Georgia in this presidential election. More Latinos, more Asian voters cast during early voting than did in all of 2016 in Georgia. New voters, 800,000 Georgia voters who were not eligible to vote in the last presidential election voted this time. 49% are people of color, 45% are people younger than 30. And of those younger voters, Georgia's electorate growing younger, 50% of its voting eligibility, the population now under the age of 45. And we've seen that huge migration to Atlanta and the suburbs surrounding Atlanta. I would think Democrats are very pleased if they can just keep this machine up and running, that they believe they've got a good chance to really sweep both in together.
Tough to do after a presidential election. Tom, you wanted in on this?
Yeah, I did. Stacey Abrams, I wonder if Democrats in Georgia are wondering right now and regretting they didn't push her harder to run for the Senate. Yvette and I have talked about this before. With the race so close right now, she is the superstar of the Democratic Party in Georgia. If it's going to come down to 1 or 2 of these elections, you almost wonder if Democrats regret they don't have her on the ballot. And I know maybe she wants to run for governor again.
It's up to her.
It's up to her, right. But it's so important. Imagine if she was one of these Democrats running for Senate right now. Would she be ahead? Would she even need a runoff? I don't know. She probably would, but I think Democrats would be happier.
You know her pretty well. Then I'll come to you, Ron. What do you think about it? Do you think she has any second thoughts?
I don't know. I don't think she thinks that way. She's very, particular. She's got her plan. She knows she's going to run for president by 2040, I think is her number. I know that she loves executive leadership over legislative leadership. I think she makes the run for governor again in 2 years. That's my expectation.
One thing we haven't mentioned, because he's not going away, is Donald Trump, and he's going to be an organizing principle.
That's the question I was asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. We're talking about. I talked a little about Joe Biden. We talked about what McConnell's doing. The fact is, Donald Trump's not going to go away quietly, and that's going to be a great organizing tool for the Democrats in these runoffs.
We've got some news coming out of the state of Nevada. I want to go to Matt Gutman in Nevada. Joe Biden increasing his lead.
Yeah, apparently to about 22,000. That's pretty much doubling his lead. He was just under 1%. Now he's nearing 2%. And this is very close to where Hillary Clinton was at 2.5% in 2016. So this is going to make the Biden camp feel very good, and probably a lot more good news ahead for the Biden camp. Still 190,000 outstanding ballots left to be tabulated. The vast majority of them mail-in ballots, and the vast majority of that, almost 90%, coming from right here in Clark County, which is a Democratic stronghold. So they're feeling pretty good right now, and it is quite likely, in fact, that they will do better than Hillary Clinton did in 2016 here in Nevada. Again, you can't underestimate the COVID factor and unemployment factor here, especially in Las Vegas and in Clark County. It has a near 15% unemployment rate. George, that is nearly twice, that is more than twice the national rate.
Tom Yamas, thank you, Matt. This map is getting smaller by the minute for Donald Trump.
It is. This is the what-if scenario we go to right now. I just want to make sure we can punch it up on our map. If you take out Nevada now, just because the lead has changed there and Joe Biden is more on top. Let's see where we're at the current map right now. We're still waiting on Alaska, but we're going to give that right now to President Trump. If Nevada is not his, he still has to win Pennsylvania, where he no longer is in the lead, North Carolina, Georgia, where he no longer is in the lead, and then he needs Arizona. He needs 4 states. It just gets very, very hard for the president at this hour. And we've made this point throughout the morning and over the last 2 days. Joe Biden's on top in Pennsylvania. The trend is going his way. If it stays that way, he gets to 273. It's game over. There's still a lot of votes out there, and we're going to be covering every twist and turn as it comes. But right now, the path for Joe Biden looks a lot easier than for President Trump.
And Chris Christie, the question that leads to is, can his legal team, can his political team and his legal team, if he's behind in Georgia, behind in Pennsylvania, behind in Arizona, behind in Nevada, can they really fight a four-front war in these challenges and recounts?
Well, they can. I don't know if they'll win, but sure they can, and that's going to be up to the client. You know, I think one of the things you learn as a lawyer very early on is you can advise your client, you can attempt to influence your client, but in the end, your client makes the decisions about how to proceed, and if you're uncomfortable as a lawyer, then you get out. But in the end, this is going to be the client's decision.
You're not the president's lawyer, but you are his friend. What do you need to see to be able to tell him this is a fight worth waging over the next days and weeks?
You know, George, I think those are really kind of personal judgments to have to make. And I think the president needs a little bit of time before anybody's going to have that kind of conversation with him, including me. Because, you know, if you want to try to influence someone in one direction or another, you have to be able to gauge whether they're receptive to even hearing it. And I think right now, given what we saw last night from the president, that he's still in fight mode and not in what do you think I should do mode. Everybody takes a little bit of different time in that. You know, for Al Gore, he fought for 37 days. And I'm sure there were some people in there who thought he should fight and some who thought he shouldn't.
Some wanted him to fight longer.
Right. And so my point is that, you know, when you know someone well, you gauge whether they're receptive to your advice, unless you think that it absolutely must be given, whether they're receptive to it or not. I don't think we're at that moment quite yet, but he's got to start thinking about what this map looks like for him.
I think, Sarah, you wanted in on this?
Well, I was going to say, I think if the president overtook Biden in Arizona, if all of a sudden there were a bunch of overseas military ballots that came in Georgia and it was close, it's going to go to
recount. He pulls into the lead again. He's got to fight.
Well, yes. And then what happens is a real legal fight over these ballots that arrived after Election Day in Pennsylvania. You know, that's perhaps a nightmare scenario for the country, but there would likely be legal standing based on the Constitution.
But that's when you're also going to get into a math issue. I mean, if he's got a 100,000 vote lead and there are 20,000 votes that have been segregated, doesn't matter.
I agree with that. There's some estimates that it could be as many as 200 or more. We'll see what it ends up being in the end. But yes, you're right. It is a math issue. But if it's close, there is going to be a real dogfight, and you will see more Republicans come out and defend the president. But that, as Tom just pointed out, that looks increasingly unlikely.
And Mary Bruce, I think one thing's clear, that Joe Biden, if indeed these states do get projected today, will come out, speak to the nation tonight. He's not going to wait for a concession call from President Trump.
No, I don't think he's going to be holding his breath for that call. They are just waiting, though, for these states to be called. And once they are confident that they've hit that 270 mark, he is expected to come out and declare victory. We have been seeing, the growing buzz of activity behind us at this stage that they've now had set up since Tuesday, waiting for this very moment. And, George, we are learning a little bit more about just the mood today inside the Biden camp. They have now had their daily staff call, and we're told that there is a real recognition amongst the campaign that this is really happening, that they will eventually be declared winners. That is their sense right now on these calls. In the past few days, there's been a much more reserved sense. Staffers told to basically keep their head down, keep up the fight, keep up the faith. Now there was a sense on this call that they did it, telling staffers to sort of take a moment, soak it all in, enjoy it. The Biden team very much feeling like they are winners today, George.
Yeah, and that's why, Mary, the speech when it comes out tonight, it's not going to be one of these somber Oval Office type things. It's going to be celebrating a victory.
I think that's right. And I think you will also hear Joe Biden continue to hit upon the themes that we have heard him hit upon every single day of this campaign, talking about the road forward, talking about the massive challenge of trying to unite this country, outlining his priorities, which we know first and foremost is trying to tackle this virus, to lead the country out of this pandemic. Joe Biden, it will be a moment that, if it does happen, is something that he has been waiting for, fighting for more than 30 years, through 3 runs for the presidency. And I do think there'll be a moment for victory and also a moment to recognize the real, very serious challenges ahead of them.
He was actually elected to his first office 50 years ago this week, Newcastle County Council. 2 years later, U.S. Senate, youngest senator at the age of 29. I want to bring in Matthew Dowd for more on this right now. Matt, you were with George W. Bush in 2000. It was mid-December, not early November, when he finally was going into the White House. And what was your advice to him? And there's a question I asked Ram earlier about how to handle these days and weeks between now and the inauguration, the message he was sending to the country. How does it apply to Joe Biden now?
I think it's incredibly applicable. There was 2 pieces of advice all of us gave George Bush then, which is 1, be humble, and 2, seek to heal and unify the country. I think, George, it's so telling today. 160 years ago today, Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860. Today, 160 years ago today. And I think Joe Biden, reflecting on what Abraham Lincoln said in his first inaugural address, which was, we are friends, we're not enemies. Let me insist on that, we're not enemies. And let's not let the strains of passion break the bonds of affection that we have and appeal to our better angels to unify the country. I think Joe Biden is going to, my guess is, he's been talking about that for a long time. Look at his Gettysburg, the address he gave in Gettysburg. That would be the advice I would give Joe Biden, but I think he's already prepared to do that. He knows this moment isn't a time to stick your fork in the other guy's eye. It's to begin to unify the country and be president of all of America, not just blue America.
And do you think the country is ready to hear that, despite the polarization we see on that map?
I think the country's incredibly ready to hear that. Listen, on both sides of the aisle, people are tired. They're tired. They've been anxious. They've been frustrated. They've been angry. They haven't liked the chaos, including Trump supporters as well as Biden supporters in the midst of this. I think the country just wants to settle down. They want to go about their business. They want to know somebody is doing what's in their best interest. They're tired of the division. They want to figure out a way to get back together. They want to talk to their neighbors again that they've been arguing with, because this election has highlighted that. And I think most everybody in America is ready just to calm down, get past the chaos, and go back to the way we could govern the country in a much more unified fashion.
Heidi Heitkamp, what do you think your former constituents in North Dakota would want to hear?
exactly what Matt was just talking about. They don't like the drama. They don't like the tweets. They just don't trust that the Democrats are going to have a policy that addresses their concern. And so I think it's now time to talk about policy. It's now time to bring the country together. And I know I sound like a broken record. Go to Omaha, Nebraska, and have a big meeting with all the governors of this country. That sends a message to Red America. I see you. I'm here. It sends a message to all the governors that we can work together and they can build momentum. You are not going to do this in the Beltway. I can't stress that enough. It's all about power in the Beltway and not governing. He needs to get out into the country and start governing the country from the outside in. And that will build strength and power and political ability to move things in Washington, D.C.
Terry Moran, thank you, Heidi. It's a great challenge for Joe Biden if indeed he is elected, but great challenges lead to great opportunities for incoming presidents.
And that's how leaders think. There's no question about it. How you get there, though, Donald Trump has been such a dominant personality in our politics. Sometimes we forget what he did on a policy level. One of the reasons he's eaten into Democratic votes is because he junked some of the gospel of republicanism in the Bush era. He didn't talk
rhetorically
about
more than on policy.
Well, he certainly didn't talk about deficits, and he didn't want anything to do with reforming Medicare or Social Security, that whole Paul Ryan gospel. All that was gone, and he was much more of an economic, talked a game of economic populism, and there may be majority support for that kind of program. One of the most popular things he talked about, he never did infrastructure. Remember, we had infrastructure week over and over. It never happened. But that is something, rebuilding in America that needs it for the 21st century, that you generally get pretty good numbers on.
And had he actually followed through on that, he might have had a better chance to unify the country. David Muir, you asked Joe Biden how he would unify the country.
Yeah, this was the day after the convention nomination where he sat down with Senator Harris as the ticket for the first time. And I asked him about that line that he began using at the convention and used it ever since, saying he might be the Democratic candidate, but he would be an American president. And this is what he said. He said, the president's job is to heal the country that needs healing. I'll be a president who tells the truth, takes responsibility, who in fact invites the opposition to the Oval Office. He talked about obviously how Democrats and Republicans hadn't been to the Oval Office to talk about how to help Americans in the middle of COVID. But then he said this. He said, the words of a president matters no matter who he is. It's time to unite the country, bring us together, and it's going to take time to heal. And it's interesting, Matt Dowd said he thinks the country's ready for it. Heidi Heitkamp says the people that she represented need to hear that. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear some of that same language from Joe Biden tonight.
It's very likely. Rhetoric is one thing, Raman. Rhetoric does matter. Words do matter. There's no question about that in a president. You also have to have the policy behind it. A little bit harder to see policies that could unify Democrats and Republicans, at least in Washington.
Yeah, one is I have a couple things. One is the fact is that this is true to also Joe Biden's. It's authentic. It's not just words. So we talk. Yes, communication, rhetoric is important, but it's authentic to his being. Second, it's one of the things he was attacked for in the Democratic primary, that you don't understand the real world, and he held on to this belief. No, I do. And in every period of time, whether it was Jefferson, whether it was Lincoln, whether it was Franklin Roosevelt, in these great ruptures that bubble up, you've had a person that has soothed them over and found a new path continuing forward. Joe really believes that. In the policy area, I do think he'll be the first to reach out, and this is actually slightly beyond policy. It's more of kind of a decency of, as he said, and I keep getting back to this picture in Minnesota where he elbowed the protester and says, I'll be your president, and he cracked the ice and invited you in to be heard. I do think the policies get changed in what your priorities. It doesn't mean you walk away from health care. It's just, do you try to hit a home run, or you try to build on something, which is what he said about, that does achieve the goal of more health care coverage and better cost control. Those are the things that then find people in a place at a seat at the table that says, I want to continue to work with you.
That's on the legislation, Chris. I want to bring you in as a former governor, though. I wonder if one of the bigger immediate opportunities for Joe Biden is, particularly when you're dealing with the issue of COVID. We know of the contentious relationship the president has had with governors across the country on testing, on getting materials to the front lines, various issues. Is this an area where it would actually be simpler for Joe Biden to work with governors, Democrats and Republicans alike?
I'll tell you what I said to the president early on in the COVID crisis. I said, let me tell you what governors care about. Governors care about money. Because if you get us the money we need to do what we need to do, we're competent enough to execute on what we need to do. And so I think in that respect, Vice President Biden has said that he wants to give more help to the state and locals and all the rest in the context of COVID. That will make him immediately more popular with the governors, because the governors will say, okay, good, now I can use this money to be able to help solve some of the problems that COVID has caused inside my state. But on the rhetorical front, I have no doubt, knowing Joe Biden for 35 years, that what Rahm said is true. That is who Joe is. He wants to try to bring people together. He believes that in his heart. He believes he's the guy who can do it, that he has the personality to do it. The real challenge for him is what I said the other night when we were on the program, which is he's going to try to unify the country and the Democratic Party at the same time. I think that's going to be an enormous challenge, and one that will prevent him from having the type of relationship with Republicans that he wants to have. He's going to have to show Republicans early on that he's willing to take on some fights with his own party to be able to make peace with them. And if he's unwilling to do that, then no matter what he says, Republicans will see him as just another Democrat.
Well, one of the things I think, if you're Joe Biden and in the Biden campaign, sure, you would probably like to win the Senate, but there's at least a part of you that recognizes that a Republican Senate is probably ultimately better for the vision that Rahm just laid out. If that's where he wants to take the country, a Republican Senate allows him some foil with the Democrats and the progressives who are going to demand more on climate, on taxes, and all of these issues. He has a natural break where he is just not going to be able to do those things, and he has somebody to blame for it. And so he can find a more centrist position and make some incremental change, which the country, typically the typical independent voter likes, but the progressives won't like it, but he won't have a choice.
If you're shaking your head, but that is factual, isn't it? If indeed the Republican Senate is there, it's going to be harder for him to implement some of the more ambitious ideas the progressives are behind.
I think we're still envisioning the Republican Party of a decade ago. Let's remember, or more than a decade ago, let's remember Mitch McConnell has held over 400 bills that the House majority has sent over. Let's remember the way that Mitch McConnell blocked Obama. That's the Mitch McConnell I expect to see. So if you're Joe Biden, you want that majority. And the reality is the Senate is still overwhelmingly moderate. And so you're going to have your moderate folks who are going to be able to tussle with the House, which is more progressive. I can't imagine a president who doesn't want to have a trifecta. That's what we spent all that money for. That's what we were aiming for. And so I think the idea is that if he can get that, then now we can start to talk as a party about how we deliver for all the parts of our party.
Rahm and then Heidi Heitkamp.
Two quick things. One is I think the vice president's going to reach out to Republicans and bring them into the table. Let him be there.
But you always want the majority if you can get it.
You didn't ask me on this panel to say yes to that. Yeah, you want the majority to see that happen. Exactly. But it's a fact. He's going to deal with reality, not what he wants, but what he has. That will be it. But he will give him a seat at the table. They don't want to participate. I think Mitch McConnell has to we're talking about Joe Biden. I think Mitch McConnell has to make a big choice. The other thing is, this is on all of us. Joe Biden's talked about all of America. And I've made this mistake. We talk about red and blue America. We have a map, and we talk about it that way. Our language has to actually contribute to an environment where we actually see each other also differently.
That's a fair point.
Okay.
Heidi Heitkamp.
I'll call that a day. A middle child.
Heidi, weigh in here.
George, I think that everybody has underestimated a pivotal moment in the debate. When the president went after the vice president and said, look, you're a communist, you're a socialist. And he said, that's what the Democratic Party is about. And Joe Biden looked at him and said, I am the Democratic Party. What I say is what the Democratic Party believes. He's already identified what he wants to do with health care. It's not Medicare for all. When they talked about the Green New Deal, he said, I have the Biden deal. When they talk about taxes, he laid out a tax plan that actually does not roll back all the corporate income tax. Look at his plans. They're clearly defined. And I think he believes that this is a mandate for his plans. He's going to promote those, but he's going to listen. He's going to bring people together. I think that I have great optimism about what's going to happen in this country if, in fact, he doesn't just deal with the Beltway. He doesn't get in the swamp. He gets out of the swamp and into the country where people are willing to listen, where people are willing to engage and actually want to see this country move forward as opposed to sustain their political power.
Thank you, Heidi. And Martha, I want to switch gears just a little bit here. I want you to put on your chief global affairs anchor hat. One of the other challenges the vice president, if indeed he is elected, is going to face is recasting, healing our relations with many of our allies as well. The president has had a fractious relationship with NATO, many of our other allies. Clearly, the relationship with China is going to be front and center as well. And it did seem like in the weeks leading up to the election that everyone overseas was kind of holding their breath and waiting this election out.
I think that's exactly what was happening, and that's exactly what I have been talking to people about, that they were simply waiting, holding their breath. If Donald Trump is, and that is a long shot now, reelected, they were very nervous about that. They knew that they could wait out 4 years, but not 8 years. And what they've seen in the last 48 hours has only made them more certain that a Joe Biden presidency would end this sort of chaos, especially our allies. Look, the countries all over the world came together after 9/11. It was our allies. It was our NATO allies. You need that in a time of crisis. We hope nothing like that ever happens again, but you absolutely need allies, and you need allies to face those adversaries. As we've said, some of those adversaries are laughing when they see the president make statements like he did last night. It's exactly what those adversaries want to see. They want to see chaos in this country. But I think Joe Biden will try to heal that if he is elected president. I think one of the first things he will do is reassure our NATO allies. But also this does kind of tie in to healing our country. I think he will go slowly and methodically as a president, heal the relationship with the allies, re-engage with China. Just don't be adversarial and in your face, or send love letters to Kim Jong-un. He's got a lot of things to do. I don't think, obviously, particularly if there is a Republican Senate, I don't think you'll see him slashing the $700 billion budget. I think he'll go somewhat slowly in places like Afghanistan, where the president suggested all the troops should be out of there. Biden's no fan of leaving troops in there forever, and I think he wanted them out over the years, but I think things like that he will do methodically. But mostly, and I do want to talk about that kind of outside the beltway that Heidi talked about. You just have to remember there's 68 million people who voted or more who voted for Donald Trump. And many of those people voted for Donald Trump because they felt they were disenfranchised. They felt Washington didn't care about them. If Joe Biden indeed goes out to that country and makes them understand that America is great, this is a shared space, a shared country, and we all have to do this together, then hopefully people who feel disenfranchised and people who feel forgotten can feel part of that shared space again.
And can he find a way to send that message on the number one challenge the country is facing, the world is facing right now? We forget this is not only an American pandemic, it is a global pandemic affecting every single nation in the world, perhaps demanding a different approach.
And I think that's going to be tough, George. I do, because I think people are pretty dug in. And as we said, when you cross the country, people just want to move on. And this is not the time to move on. It is a very, very serious time for COVID. And David was talking a little bit about that as well. We are in the middle of second, third wave, a lot of deaths, a lot more cases. But if he does it with compassion, if he does it with leadership, and everyone I've talked to about who they want as president talks about leadership. If he can show that leadership and a reason that we have to do that to protect others so we can get the economy back. We've also talked about this. I think if Donald Trump had done that, if Donald Trump had said to the nation, we're going to fight this together, put your masks on, I think this may have been a different outcome in the presidential race. And so Joe Biden needs to pick up that ball, and in some way where he understands that he has to reverse what a lot of people are saying and do it with compassion and power and leadership, that people hopefully will listen, because it is the single most important thing we have to get through right now.
Terry Moran.
The damage is done around the world. The world leaders have looked at America, and world population looks at America differently, because it's not just the personality of Donald Trump, which is kind of bull in a china shop around the world. Maybe it needed it, bull in that china shop. It's the tens of millions of people who voted for him, in part a rejection of the globalist consensus of both parties since World War II. If you're the president of France or the prime minister of a smaller country like Denmark, you have to think they might do that again. And my strategic planning for my country, and the voters in those countries, well, we can't count on the United States in the same way anymore. And Angela Merkel said it. She said Europe has to start recognizing that we are alone in many ways. We don't have a 1945 alliance. NATO will be cobbled together. He'll focus on it. But we're a different country in the eyes of the world. And in some ways, in part because of our disastrous handling of the pandemic, a lesser one.
Thank you, Terry. Pierre Thomas, one other relationship the vice president will have to attend to right away, his relationship with the intelligence community. We knew going forward that President Trump had been talking about even firing the FBI director, had put his own people into the intelligence community. What should we expect from Joe Biden there?
Well, George, notwithstanding, mistakes made by the FBI and various intelligence agencies, and they have made mistakes. This much I can tell you. In all the years that I've covered the Justice Department, this president put more pressure on those organizations by what he said and what he tweeted than I've ever seen. The Justice Department, as you mentioned, the FBI, under incredible pressure to do the will of the president. And what they want to do is focus on the issues of national security, crime, all those issues. So one of the things, if Joe Biden becomes the next president, is that I'm talking to sources, and many of them think that they will hopefully be able to just focus on the job. And that job is a complicated, stressful one, which is right now trying to deal with, okay, what are the foreign nations going to do in terms of trying to sow disinformation during this period where this is all being sorted out. Number two, today there's information about people that are being investigated who came into the Philadelphia area with firearms. That's being sorted out by law enforcement, the FBI, and the Philadelphia police. The conversation about the election being stolen. I had a senior official talk to me last night about how there's great concern that the fringe, slivers of people might use this as an opportunity to sow the cultural and civil war that they've been working to foment. So, George, law enforcement right now is looking for calm. And the intelligence community is the same thing. They want to do the job against very real adversaries and trends that are out there.
Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. It's just after noon here on the East Coast right now. Some of our stations are leaving us for local news, but our coverage is going to continue. And we are back now. Let's reset the table where things stand as the votes continue to come in across the country right now, and especially in those key battleground states. As we've been telling you, Joe Biden has won 22 states, 253 electoral votes. Donald Trump, 214 states, 214 electoral votes, 23 states won. And right now, counting the votes in those key states, Pennsylvania. Let's take a look at it right now. There you see Pennsylvania. Joe Biden has pulled into the lead, about a 9,000 vote lead now over Donald Trump. There's still about 120,000 or so votes left out in Pennsylvania right now. In the state of Georgia, overnight again, Joe Biden has pulled ahead by about 1,500 votes. Right now in the state of Georgia, at least 4,000 votes remain to be counted there, but we have provisional and military ballots in Georgia as well. In Arizona, we now know that Joe Biden has about a 43,000 vote lead with 93% of the expected vote in. Even though that is tightening, it is a strong position now for Joe Biden. And in Nevada, right now, Joe Biden has actually expanded his lead in the last hour, now a 20,000 vote lead, 50 to 48% with 92% of the expected vote in. Tom Yamas, let's walk through some of these states.
Yeah, okay, where do you want to start, George? We can start in Pennsylvania right now to talk about how Joe Biden took over the lead. It happened overnight, and basically what happened is when we went to bed, there was a lead that Donald Trump had. It shrunk, and then Joe Biden took over. As you mentioned, at this hour right now, roughly, he has about a 9,000 vote lead over President Trump. As you mentioned also, there's about 120,000 votes still left to be counted. The reason why the Biden campaign believes at this hour they have the advantage is because out of these blue counties right here, Philadelphia going north through the Lehigh Valley into Scranton, there's still about 50,000 ballots out here. And since these are blue counties the Biden campaign fills, they're going to win a majority of those ballots. Also, out of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, there's about 35,000 ballots that still have to be counted. Again, a blue county. When you add these numbers up, you get about 85, 90,000. You're closing in on 120,000 ballots. There's just not enough room, possibly, for the president to catch up. But again, this race is taking twists and turns, and we're covering every angle, George.
Okay, Tom, thanks. Nate, let's walk through this as well. You've been firming up your belief that the president's past have basically evaporated over the course of the night. Let's start with Pennsylvania, then move on to Arizona and Nevada.
So these mail votes should probably come in about 3-1 for Biden in Pennsylvania, based on how they've come in so far. That would put him up around 70,000 votes. There are also provisional votes in Pennsylvania that will, on top of that, that could give him a bigger lead. So I think it's not going to end up actually in the recount margin. With the mail votes counted, it'll be probably about a 1-point Biden lead, maybe 2 points after provisionals. So I think it's not going to be close in the final accounting as it might appear right now. There's an inevitability to the pace here.
Quite similar to what happened in Michigan.
Yeah, and you look at Michigan, even Wisconsin less so, but Michigan is very similar to Pennsylvania, right? Where you have the mail vote counted last, and every time you look at Michigan, the margin grows a bit. So it's going to be, you know, you wouldn't quite call it comfortable, but comfortable enough that there wouldn't be any dispute over, for example, ballots that came in after Election Day. Biden does not need those ballots, in my view, to have a comfortable-ish lead, let's call it, in Pennsylvania.
We saw the White House disputing other networks saying that Joe Biden has won the state of Arizona. Even though it's tightening there, you say it's not tightening enough?
Yeah, and again, I have been optimistic for President Trump's case in Arizona until this last batch of ballots in Maricopa County, where he was only up 5 or 6 points. He has to be up 20. Now there are far fewer ballots left. So, I mean, it's not impossible to imagine. Arizona's been, frankly, less transparent about which votes are which as compared to, like, Georgia, which has been wonderfully transparent. But that batch was quite poor for President Trump.
We're not ready to project Nevada, but you think it's done for Joe Biden?
Yeah, in fact, since we were last doing this roundup, the lead for Biden's doubled in Nevada roughly because of more ballots from Clark County. I mean, I think that might wind up being a 3 or 4 point Biden win. There are a lot of blue votes left out there. Nevada is, I mean, even maybe more so than Pennsylvania in some ways, a state that Biden can feel comfortable about.
And then finally, Georgia, looking like a recount.
It's going to be a recount, I would think. There are some overseas and military absentee votes left to count. There are a handful of provisionals. It's not clear which way those will break. But, you know, I mean, there is a recount threshold at 0.5 points for a reason. You want to check things twice and 3 times over. But, like, I think we're not going to have more than the 0.5 points there for Biden. But I think he is the favorite to ultimately prevail there as well.
Nate, reflect now on your final projection. I think was it 89-10 or 90-10 that Joe Biden would win.
Yeah.
And you never really wavered in that projection, but the map does look quite different now than it looked, say, 11:30 on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I think people are not used to these red shifts and blue shifts. I mean, it's going to be a feature of elections going forward where if you have one party voting mostly by mail and one party votes mostly in person, and different states count these in different orders, it's going to be very confusing. We have to kind of think, learn the lesson better next time, that you can't really come to many conclusions until maybe Thursday or Friday. There was a point in time which looked like Biden might win Ohio and Texas. He did not, right? He did not lose, though, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where he was trailing. So just kind of hold your horses, I think, is the key before you judge polls, forecasts, and write too much of a narrative.
Right. We really can't underestimate that. I want to bring Rick Klein in on this question. It was our pollster, Gary Langer, who said this is basically, it's going to be like Netflix. We're now going to be voting in entirely new ways. It was accelerated by the pandemic. It's going to change the way elections are run. We're going to have to get used to the idea that elections are going to take place over weeks and months, not one day. It's going to change campaigns. It's going to change the way people think about it.
This is just the fact of voting in America. It's changed. The concept of election day is antiquated. It made sense in a previous generation. It no longer makes sense to think about this as a single day of voting. I mean, just think about what we've seen over the last couple of days. If the initial returns had reflected what we're seeing happen with these early votes, we would have had a much different election night and a different experience as a country over the last couple of days. And as much as we can say we counsel patience, people haven't fully adjusted to that reality, in part because of COVID and in part because states have been moving in this direction for a long time. People are voting and living their lives in much different ways. And I think our expectations have to adjust. And the parties have to adjust. It's not going to be realistic for Republicans to say that vote by mail is not a good way to vote. The fact is, it's a way that you can bank votes. It's definitely something that smart campaigns are going to have to use.
Matthew, Dad, you've run campaigns. You've been part of high levels of campaigns. How are they going to change?
Well, one of the things I think we have to acknowledge is this is not a temporary change because of COVID. I give you an experience in Texas where we've had early voting, which went on for 2 weeks before Election Day. Once that started, a small amount of people started doing it. Once people got in the habit, now the majority of people in Texas do it, and it's just become part of their lives. That's what's going to happen here. And so this is going to fundamentally, for many people around the country, like, when do you hold debates? I think it's no longer advisable to hold a debate a week out or 10 days out when half the country's already voted. So you're going to have to move up debates. Campaigns are going to have to move up their messaging. Campaigns are going to have to move up when they do interviews or important interviews. Campaigns are going to have to move up GOTV operations that used to be all organized the weekend before or on Election Day. All of that's going to have to be moved up. Who you staff, how you operate, all of those things are going to become incredibly important. How you spend money. When we sit here and judge campaigns, the end of October, they had X amount of money in the bank. Well, that may become meaningless if more than half the country has already voted in this. And so I think the media is going to have to we're going to have to respond to this, and how we want to interview a candidate or talk to a candidate or hold some sort of conversation. We're going to have to do those much earlier in the process instead of thinking about the voter is about to decide in 24 hours when the voters decided 2 weeks ago.
Yvette, it sounds like a recipe for perpetual organizing.
Oh, yes, which I think actually parties should be organizing outside of elections. I think talking to your voters constantly and your constituents constantly about what they need should be the way of the future. I also think there's going to be a huge emphasis on making sure we pay attention to these Secretary of State and AG races so that we empower the vote rather than restrict the vote. Some of the places where we're having contentious conversations are where folks are trying to stop counting at a certain point or not count votes. We really need to facilitate voting. And I think the fear that Republicans have is when we empower people to vote and we organize them to vote, we win every time. And what we want is to get a good reflection of where voters are, and we want as many people voting as we can.
Sarah Fagan, you've been in the middle of campaigns as well. What are your reflections on this?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Matt said. And campaigns are going to have to shift their resource allocation. You know, you think about campaigns, they backload all their money on TV advertising, and they start the week before the election and they work backwards. They're going to have to pick a point now and start and work forward. And that's going to be a fundamental shift. I think the other thing that's happening in this country, at the same time that people are changing their voting patterns, we see it now, we're streaming right now, is the way people are consuming media is changing. And so many campaigns that I see run today still are very 1980. They're not thinking enough about these new platforms. They're not thinking about the very many ways and identity resolution you need to do between streaming and broadcast and mail and door knocking. There's a lot that needs to happen in politics.
Rahm Emanuel, I saw you're nodding your head at that. You and I, of course, worked together in the 1992 campaign. Neither one of us will be qualified to run a campaign in this environment.
Speak for yourself, George. But I will say, I remember my last mayoral race, I said, I feel, you know, when they were talking about all the types of ways we were going to go on what platforms, I said, I feel I was around when William McKinley ran. I mean, and I will say one little anecdote. I take the train to work, go to the city. I'm reading the paper, and one day I look up from the paper, and everybody's on their iPhone. I said, this is not working as a communication strategy, what I'm doing here. So I do think one thing, yes, new technologies, but we learn old things over and over again. Door knocking, that's old school. And I think actually Trump showed door knocking works. They went back to something that, so yes, I agree, update timing, media, different ways of communicating, social networking. Just in the old way, the way precinct captains used to do it in Chicago. That's what your friends do, what your neighbors are doing, matters a tremendous amount. So candidates matter, campaigns matter. Yes, there are new ways of delivering that point, but there's also a lot of old ways that got to dust them off and just sharpen them again.
And Chris, there's no question that was one of the things that was working so well for President Trump, the relationship he had with his base and the relationship his base had with each other. It's a very cohesive group. Where does that go in the future?
Well, you know, it's too early to tell, right? I mean, we're not even really officially through this. And I think, you know, having one of the people who was in the 16 primary against President Trump, we were talking about this just the other night. All of us, I was talking to two of the other candidates, and we were saying, we never thought he was really going to stay in the race. We never really thought.
And you were waiting for the other one to take him out.
Well, yeah, everybody was waiting for that moment. And you know, his appeal, I think, is uniquely personal. And, remember, he's the first candidate in my lifetime who's come into a race with nearly 100% name ID, from having been on primetime television for 10 years in the top-rated show, who had books and all the rest of it beforehand, did not travel the traditional political road. And so it made it very, very difficult for all of us who were in the traditional political lane to do that. Now his supporters need to look for someone, I don't think the same type of person, but someone who's talking about some of the same things.
Well, let me press that, because I think that is an interesting point. You see a lot of people wondering, some worrying, is this going to mean that other candidates who want to emulate Trump, see the kind of success he had with his base, can get away with the kind of personal behavior we saw, the false statements and everything like that? I tend to agree with you that it seems difficult that someone's going to be able to emulate that.
They have to be. Listen, he is a unique figure in media. He's a unique figure in American politics, and now I think a unique figure in American history if he's not reelected. And so I think the biggest mistake I've seen over the years, being almost as old as Rahm now, is that candidates make the same mistake over and over again. They run the last campaign in the next campaign. They think that what happened 4 years ago is applicable this time. It was one of the things I said to the president 131 days before the election. I said, you're running the 16 campaign in 20. The country is different in 20 and won't respond as well as you think it will to a 16 campaign. And if he does lose, I think that's going to be one of the biggest reasons that he does. So we're sitting here right now in 2020. We can't see the future yet. But one thing I know for sure, the campaign that wins this time will not be the campaign that wins the next time in terms of approach. It has to be different and wind up listening to the country and responding to what the country
Almost
wants.
never is. Great point. Heidi Heitkamp?
I think one thing that we're missing here is the money. I once said 80% of all campaign finance that you spend is wasted. My pollster agreed with me, said that's right. You just don't know which 20% you should be spending. I think we know a little bit better now. And this idea that money is going to win an election, I mean, you saw it over and over again in these Senate races. Money does not win elections. Organizing wins elections, to Yvette's point. And you've got to start really understanding big data, because I can drop a pin in North Dakota and talk to every nursing home worker right now and get a direct message to them. And so these campaigns are going to get more sophisticated, and money is going to be less and less of a factor. And communication and the right, as Trump proved, the right product to sell is absolutely essential.
Heidi Heitkamp, thanks. Let's go back to the field now, check in, because the vote still is being counted in these key states. I want to start in the state of Pennsylvania. Eva Pilgrim, want to give us an update on where things stand right now, what we can expect over the course of the day?
Well, right now, looking at the numbers, Joe Biden is leading by a slim margin here in Pennsylvania, about 9,000 votes. There's still about 120,000 of those outstanding ballots that need to be counted. And we are expecting, the state has given us the idea that those will mostly be counted today. Here in Pennsylvania, George, I just kind of want to go back to some of that information that has been swirling out there about whether or not those ballots that arrived after Election Day are being counted. Right? Those ballots are in question. They were postmarked. They have until Friday to arrive. The state has told us earlier this week that those ballots were to be segregated. We actually went ahead and called today, and the three largest counties in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Allegheny, and Montgomery, all three of those counties confirmed to us that they have, in fact, segregated those ballots, and they have not been counted yet. They will not start counting those ballots until later today, if the court tells them that that is something that they should do. And I just also want to reiterate the fact that decision and that running of this election process is being done by a bipartisan group here in Philadelphia. The commissioner that actually confirmed for us that those ballots were segregated was Al Schmidt. He's a Republican here. And that group that is counting the ballots, they are Republican and Democrat. So it's a mixture of people in the room. It's an important distinction that I think the American public needs to understand as they see this vote total come in. This total does not include those ballots that are in question, George.
Eva Pilgrim, thanks. Let's go to Nevada. Matt Gutman, Joe Biden's lead has expanded in the last hour by a significant amount.
A significant amount indeed. I mean, when we spoke yesterday at about this time, it was only 7,000. It trickled up to about 11,000 late yesterday, and right now it's at 22,000 votes, which is not an enormous number of votes in the scheme of the country, but here in Nevada, it's basically 2% of the electorate. He is not far away from that threshold that Hillary Clinton got in 2016, 2.5%. So it's getting significant, and even more so, the ballots that are left to be counted, about 84,000 of them just here in Clark County. Again, this is a Democratic stronghold. 70% of the entire population of Nevada is in this county, which houses Las Vegas. And the Biden campaign feels so good about this now, as opposed to just a few hours ago when they were kind of hedging. They're feeling so good about it now. They now tell me they're just waiting for the AP or Fox or somebody to call the race here. Now, COVID has been a major issue here in Las Vegas. It has really hit this industry, which is the tourism industry in Las Vegas, extraordinarily hard. The unemployment rate is at near 15%. I just want to go back. One more note about the elections here. It has been really slow, and the reason for that is, for the first time in state history, a mail-in ballot has been sent to every single active voter in the state, and it is taking more time. But I don't know if you guys have seen it in New York, but it's generating a lot of pretty funny memes about how slow the state has been. But again, the state is telling us, and chiefly the registrar here in Clark County, they don't care about speed right now. They just want to be thorough, make sure that every legal vote counts, and they're doing their job. George.
I was going to say slow is okay as long as it's right. But Matt, one other point I want to ask you about. It seemed like you're in the midst of some commotion last night at the polling places where these protesters come out. It really calmed down today?
I think it's calmed down significantly. And even yesterday, George, the commotion was sort of a spouting of anger, of frustration. It wasn't about trying to turn the election anyway. And I sensed a bit of resignation among the crowd there. People understood that this is pretty much over in Nevada, that because there are so many votes left to be counted here in Clark County, which is typically very blue, they're not going to win. But they wanted their voices heard. But again, and I think it's because the president has been sowing a lot of these falsehoods. There is a significant amount of concern about fraud. And again, there is zero evidence that there is any systemic fraud going on in the system. Each individual ballot that is questionable is being examined. There have been a lot of curing of ballots, so making sure that the signatures of voters match. But by and large, this has been a fair election here, according to officials. Still, it doesn't dampen that frustration and hasn't shut off the lawsuits that the Trump campaign has filed against the state of Nevada, including its Republican Secretary of State. So I don't know when that's going to abate. I think hopefully if there is some sort of conclusion to this soon, maybe today, maybe in a few hours, that'll help put things to rest here, George.
Thank you, Matt. Let's go to Arizona right next door. Whit Johnson, same question for you. We saw demonstrations Tuesday and Wednesday. What's the mood and tenor there today?
George, it's similar. We have seen that barricaded area outside the county recorder's office that they set up with the fencing and set up what they called a free speech zone to try to make sure that it's safe for protesters to want to go. And it's an interesting dynamic because you have the Trump administration and the president himself telling people to stop the count, and yet protesters here were saying count the ballots. So there is some frustration similar to what Matt Gutman was talking about in Nevada here. But we also just have some interesting developments in terms of the numbers this morning, because we see Joe Biden's lead shrinking, but at the same time, the path to victory for Donald Trump is becoming more difficult. That's because Biden is up by about 43,000 votes right now. There are about 200,000 still outstanding from across the state. So that path is becoming more difficult. Democrats growing increasingly confident. And also, we mentioned the Senate earlier on, and I said, watch Mark Kelly. And sure enough, now we have that projection, Mark Kelly to go to the Senate. The first time Arizona will have 2 Democrats in the Senate in nearly 70 years. And you have to think about the legacy of John McCain in all of this. That was John McCain's seat. John McCain's wife, Cindy, endorsed Joe Biden. There was no love lost between the McCains and the Trumps. And Martha McSally, the Republican in this race, has the unique distinction of being a Senate candidate to lose 2 Senate races within 2 years. Once as a candidate in 2018, it was Kyrsten Sinema who ended up winning and going, but then she was appointed to McCain's Senate seat by the governor after he died. And now it looks as though she's going to lose her second race. And all of this comes down to really a popularity contest because Mark Kelly, well known, the astronaut, of course, the husband of Gabby Giffords, who was shot and nearly killed back in 2011. And McSally had some issues with her ties to Donald Trump. They had that awkward moment when he came recently for a rally where Trump invited her on stage and kind of told her to hurry up and then shooed her off stage. She also had issues on health care. Mark Kelly really went after her on that she was her votes against pre-existing conditions, but then also claiming that she would keep them. The independent vote and the moderate vote really standing out here in Arizona as well. We've seen some of the exit polls, both Mark Kelly and Joe Biden performing well here. This is a state, George, where 1/3 of the voters are independent, and a state where there are many shifting
I wonder if
demographics.
something else is going on there as well. We also saw those in the debates there. Martha McSally put on the spot over her relationship, whether she was proud to be supporting President Trump, and she couldn't answer that. And of course, Arizona, the home of Barry Goldwater, long time a conservative state, but you've got John McCain and Cindy McCain, as you said, pushing back, endorsing Joe Biden. Jeff Flake, the former senator, pushing back. And in some ways, in Arizona, which is a pretty close race right now, it was not only demographics, but personal. The party of Barry Goldwater pushing back against the Republican Party of Donald Trump.
There's no question about it. And what we saw with Martha McSally, it's an interesting case study because if you look at her voting record, it's almost lockstep with Donald Trump. But one of the first things on her website when she talks about issues is her ability to work as a bipartisan and reach across the aisle and get things done. So at the very end of the campaign, she seemed to be trying to distance herself awkwardly from the president, but still trying to maintain his base. You mentioned that moment in the debate. 3 times, she would not say whether she was proud of her support for Donald Trump. She also was very vocal about her disapproval of the way Donald Trump talked about John McCain. And again, with the independents here, George, we spoke to voters who voted for Donald Trump and then also voted for Mark Kelly. So that's why, again, it was really a popularity contest here. And in true McCain fashion, in Maverick country, people here in Arizona like to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down for the candidates they like and the issues they care about.
Whit Johnson, thanks very much. Another changing state, perhaps the state of Georgia down in the South. Last time it went to a Democrat, 1992. Bill Clinton, Steve Osunsami is there. Joe Biden holding on to that lead as more votes are counted.
He is. Right now, that lead is about 1,500 to 1,600 votes. Joe Biden advantage at this point. There are still, according to the Secretary of State's office, about 4,200 ballots, absentee ballots outstanding. Most of those votes we expect to come from Gwinnett County, which is a suburban Atlanta county to the north of Atlanta, a blue county. We expect many of those votes will break in the favor of Joe Biden. One thing that's being talked about here today, a lot of people are looking at the Trump campaign's approach to the state of Georgia. One of the things that people are now sort of second guessing is whether it was smart for the president and his campaign to brag about how they had this state in the bag, how they were probably going to win this state as Republicans normally do, because that prompted Democrats to show up. Joe Biden's team was here. Barack Obama was here the day before the election, and we see what is happening now, a very close race. Another thing I'll point out is Stacey Abrams. She gets a lot of credit. She ran for governor and lost in a very narrow election a few years ago by about 55,000 votes. She gets a lot of credit for focusing attention on the Secretary of State's office and this idea of voter suppression, charges that have been levied against Republicans in this state for years. There's a joke now being told among Democrats that there are many Republicans this morning who probably wish that she had won her election a few years ago. I have a friend who is close, who is in the Republican Party, worked for one of the Republican administrations, who explained to me that this is really no surprise what they're seeing here, that the Atlanta area alone is seeing about 50,000 new residents, many from the Northeast, many Hispanic, many African Americans every 2 years. And so when you look at that and you look at when Stacey Abrams ran and what is happening today, that explains how close this vote is right now. George.
Steve Osunsami, thanks. Lindsay Davis, Stacey Abrams got close. Joe Biden now ahead.
That's right. I want to pick up of what Steve was saying about Stacey and also what Heidi and Yvette were saying about organizing, because I had the opportunity to talk to Raphael Warnock yesterday, of course.
Running for Senate.
Yes, the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, of course, also Martin Luther King Jr.'s home church. And he talked about how he and Stacey Abrams were able to help register 400,000 new voters in Georgia. He said this of the numbers: "It's not the result of magic or happenstance. This is the hard work we've been doing on the ground for years." And people often talk about the proof is in the pudding. Here's the pudding. Biden got more than 525,000 votes than Stacey Abrams, more than 570,000 votes than Hillary Clinton, more than 600,000 more than Obama. And especially, we were also talking about with Witt, the legacy of John McCain. How about the legacy of John Lewis, too, with his district being what ultimately gave Biden the edge in Georgia?
Okay, Lindsay, David, thanks very much. We're about to hear from Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the Republican National Committee. She's about to give a press conference in Washington. Christy, one of the interesting things to listen for is how much does she echo the rhetoric of President Trump?
You know, there's been a lot of conversation that I've heard in the last 12 hours, George, about there being, you know, some interesting back and forth between the White House and the RNC chairman.
Okay, let's listen. Mark, do we have her yet? Okay. Let's listen in. She's about to come to the podium.
By continuing to count Republican poll challengers who had left the building in their official total and not allowing replacements to come to fill those vacancies. They had no sign-out process and knowingly created a system that were not permitted to have the number of challengers that were legally obligated to have. To hide their blatant partisanship, city employees who then covered the windows of the TCF Center to conceal the truth. What else could they be hiding? Jocelyn Benson ran on a promise to be transparent, and this election has been anything but transparent. We are also highly disturbed by the fact that the Secretary of State was unable to tell voters how many votes were left to be counted.
Okay, those are complaints about what's happening in Pennsylvania. I believe we're going to stand by watching, wait till Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the RNC, does come to the podium. Meantime, John Carl, let me bring you in. You're getting some more word from inside the White House about the mood inside the White House, their approach over the next several hours.
Yeah, look, there's really a couple of camps, George. There's looking to see what path forward to challenge the results that we're seeing come together. The president, very much so, as he has said publicly, but he has also said privately, wants somehow the Supreme Court to come to his rescue here. And they've searched what viable paths there would be for a legal challenges that would ultimately end up at the court. The bottom line is it's really not clear there is any. There's not even a concept of what possibly could end up at the Supreme Court that would affect the counting and the results in all of these states. So there's also, some within the president's team, some very close to the president, who see the obvious and frankly have seen the obvious. Have seen what they believe is the obvious for a couple of days, that he has a very good chance of losing, maybe even probably losing, and thinking about what the next steps are, what kind of an exit does he take, what comes next. One interesting dynamic here is real anger, a seething anger at an interesting source. Anger not at these states, at Democrats. There's that too, but anger at Fox News, which has been, the president's favorite network for his 4 years.
And that's about the call of Arizona on Tuesday night?
Well, it's about the call in Arizona. Fox called. We still haven't called Arizona yet. Fox and the Associated Press were the only two news organizations to project Arizona for Joe Biden. They have repeatedly stood by that projection, despite withering criticism from the Trump campaign and demands that it be retracted. But also, a sense that on the news side of Fox News, real skepticism about the president's claims of widespread fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So real anger there. So you remember when many people thought the president was going to lose 4 years ago. There was all this talk of a Trump TV, of forming basically a Trump television network. You're starting to hear some of that talk as well as kind of a way to try to get back at Fox News. But the anger at Fox is real within the president's team and on behalf of the president
and
himself.
it's been there for quite a while. I mean, back it's now more than a year ago, in June of 2019, I was traveling with the president, and he asked me to come up to the front of the plane. It was at night, and we were watching Fox News, as he does, as you would imagine. And it happened to be a night where there were some Quinnipiac polls which were not positive for the president. And he took it as a personal affront that Fox News would actually report polls from Quinnipiac because they weren't positive for President Trump.
He took it as an affront during this campaign when he saw Fox carrying a speech by Barack Obama on behalf of Joe Biden live. He took it as an affront when Fox did a town hall meeting with Joe Biden. It was as if he expected Fox News to act as state television, only carrying Republicans, only carrying Donald Trump, only reporting polls that were favorable to Donald Trump. So this has been something that has been around for some time, but it's kicked up to a new level now as his fate is being determined, and he sees Fox, he believes, at the leading edge of questioning whether or not he has won this election. Now we'll see what happens when ultimately, projections are made and where things are. But there is real anger from the president, and I have to say it extends to the president's team at Fox News, which has been about as. And it's parts of Fox News, and as you know, there are news people at Fox News, there are opinion people at Fox News, but Fox has been about as loyal to the president, much of Fox News, as any entity in this country, and he is really angry at them right now.
John Carl, thanks very much. Ronna McDaniel, RNC chair, is at the podium now. Let's listen in.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Laura Cox, for your leadership in the great state of Michigan, my home state. And we, of course, want to make sure that every legal vote is counted. And we have seen some discrepancies in Michigan and some irregularities that deserve investigation. Democrats and the media spent 4 years and millions of taxpayer dollars talking about a Russia hoax on the grounds of election integrity. Now, with just over 48 hours after polls have closed in an actual election for president, they want to ignore clear irregularities, rush to call states as one, and end this election. We will not stand for that. Every candidate in every office, from president down to the local level, has a legal right to challenge irregularities that occur in the process of canvassing ballots. We intend to ensure that every lawful voter has their vote counted in accordance with the law, that observers are granted the access they are due under state law, and that any irregularities that have occurred, whether by malicious intent or incompetence, are fully investigated to the fullest extent allowed under the law. We will not give up on this process until every last issue has been resolved. Today, we announced that the RNC has deployed legal teams in 4 states, including Michigan, to investigate clear irregularities with vote counting and tabulation in those states. They will work with state and local authorities to ensure that a legal count is conducted in accordance to each state's laws and that every vote is counted. It is crazy to us that the media would call a race like Arizona for Biden when our side still has enough votes to win. But in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia, where in some cases the margin is only a few thousand votes, the media is quick to try and claim those races are over and Biden has won. If the shoe was on the other foot, the president and President Trump was in the lead in all these states, the media would be screaming that the race is not over and we need more time to count and make sure it was right. But because Biden is in a very slight lead, the media demands the race is over, and there is nothing to see here. The American people need to have confidence in our elections. Right now, we don't have that because across the country, Democrat officials are shutting down transparency, especially here in the state of Michigan. Democrats are damaging the country in the process of a smooth transition of power by not allowing a transparent process. Right here in Michigan, just last night in Oakland County, we found 2,000 ballots that had been given to Democrats that were Republican ballots due to a clerical error, and this took place in Rochester Hills. In Wayne County, Republican poll watchers were denied their legal right to monitor the election and purposely kept in the dark, both literally and figuratively, with poll workers blocking windows and padlocking doors. There are hundreds of reports of our poll watchers being intimidated and unable to do their job. There was a major software issue in Antrim County that we have concerns could have caused problems in other counties as well. This issue was brought to our attention by Congressman Bergman's office when they noticed the results being drastically different from what they expected and what they have received.
Okay,
from
there's
that
Rhonda
county in
McGann, the
past
RNC
elections.
chair,
When
talking
they
about
inquired with the clerk,
violations and
they were told
irregularities
it
that
was
she's concerned about, especially in the state of Michigan. She also had some complaints about the media right there. But Terry Moran, I want to start with you on the legal front. I think the margin in Michigan is about 150,000 votes right now, and some of these complaints have gone to the courts.
They have in Michigan and in other states. Now, she's arguing in the court of public opinion there, and she can throw out all kinds of stuff. You get to the court of law, you got to provide evidence. And the case that they brought in Michigan was summarily rejected by the judge. He said, you don't have any evidence. It was based on a posted note. I'm not kidding. On a posted note with an unsigned note saying, they're telling me to change the addresses. They presented that to the court in Michigan without any evidence of where it came from or who or what it really meant. And the judge said that is hearsay at best. In Pennsylvania, when they've raised this, we aren't getting close enough and nefarious things are happening with the ballots. And then the judge, the federal judge appointed by George W. Bush, looks at what they're saying, recognizes that actually they are in the room. They'd like to get a little closer. He says, I'm not sure what your problem is here. You know, what's your problem? And in Georgia, when they brought a case, the judge there said, quote, I don't see any evidence of what you're talking about. So the court of public opinion is one thing, and you can rile people up, but you get to the court of law, and you have to provide evidence. And so far, it's strike three out there.
I want to bring in Katie Hobbs, the Arizona Secretary of State, talk more about what's happening there on the ground. Welcome back. It's good to see you again, Secretary Hobbs. We now have seen more of the vote come in from Maricopa County this morning. Tell us where you stand. How much longer you expect to go?
Well, Maricopa County has told us that they are going to be counting through the weekend, but I think they're going to upload more ballots that have been tabulated today at 7 p.m. tonight, and at that point, they should be under 100,000 ballots left. Statewide, we're sitting at about 240,000 ballots. 137,000 of those are in Maricopa County right now.
So you're closing in on finally counting the votes, but it's going to take a few more days. You have finished up, it appears, we've at least projected that Mark Kelly is going to win the Senate race. Have you had any other incidents in the last 24 hours? The last time we spoke, there were some demonstrations you were dealing with. What's the situation like now?
Those demonstrations continued last night outside of the tabulation center in Maricopa. And, you know, I'm going to continue with my message of let the election workers do their job and tabulate the ballots, which is what you're asking for. And actually presence there is disruptive and potentially causing delays. And certainly anyone who is going to be out there inciting violence is not welcome. And we need to keep these protests peaceful.
How about, you know, the Trump campaign has had some complaints about the voting systems and other irregularities inside your state. Have you seen any problems that you think are going to need to be adjudicated in the courts?
No, there have been no irregularities going on. Quite frankly, if he's saying that, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
And, okay, well, that's about as blunt as it gets right there. Thank you. Do you expect to be in a situation you're going to be having a recount in the state of Arizona?
No, our recount margin is very narrow. It's 200 votes or 1/10% of the votes cast for whatever particular race we're looking at, and I do not expect it to get within that margin.
Katie Hobbs, Arizona Secretary of State, thanks for joining us again this morning, actually this afternoon here on the East Coast. Want to go to Mary Bruce? We have some news from the Biden campaign.
George, we have learned that the former vice president is expected to give an address tonight here behind me to the nation in prime time. A clear sign that they believe that they have got this in the bag, George.
So, Mary, that's interesting. They decided not to wait. We were hearing from the campaign over the last couple of days. They would wait until more states were officially projected by the media before they would come out and announce this kind of a speech. I assume that means they're quite sure that those projections will come before 8 p.m.
And I was literally just texting a source that exact question. What happened? What changed? What made you feel confident that what tipped the scale enough for you to come out and announce that you're going to be giving this address, or confirm that you're going to be giving this address? Haven't gotten a clear answer yet, but they have been waiting all along, essentially for all of us, for the media to declare that they have hit that 270 number. They clearly feel that they will reach that point by tonight.
Okay, Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Chris Christie, I want to quickly go to you, and then we've got Eric Garcetti standing by as well. Pretty clear that yesterday the president saw Joe Biden go give a talk in the late afternoon and decided he was going to go have his say as well. What's the likely response to this news that Joe Biden will speak tonight?
The only question in my mind is, will he try to preempt him or go after him? And by after him, I mean after his address.
So 9 p.m., say.
Right. So is it 9 p.m. or is it 7 p.m.? But I don't have any doubt in my mind that the president will say something, either to preempt what the vice president's going to say tonight or to respond to it.
Okay, Chris Christie, thanks very much. Going to join now by Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. Mayor Garcetti, thanks for joining us this morning. California hasn't gotten all that much attention in this presidential race because it was always in Joe Biden's camp, and of course also home to Senator Kamala Harris.
We're so excited, not only as Californians, but as an Angelino and longtime friend of Senator Harris, but also as national co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign. There's kind of two radical notions today, George. One is that our democracy is worth defending, worth fighting for, that its integrity matters. And second, as I think we're confident that you will see in the coming days, the idea that a president will finally be here in America who believes that he should be a president for everybody. Those who vote for him, those who don't vote for him, and truly to stitch back a United States of America, whether it's in California all the way to Delaware and everywhere in between. These two radical notions, I think, have been lifted up. It's a great moment for America. No matter what side you're on, I hope all of us can see that integrity and that defense of our democracy is everything.
We've been talking about that a little bit here this morning, and clearly those will be the words as Vice President Biden has used them during the campaign. He's used them since Tuesday night. He will use them again tonight. Put some meat on those bones, though. How does he achieve that?
Well, obviously, potentially a split Senate, though we'll see, requires that. And the agenda that we've laid out in this campaign is all about that. That COVID-19 should never have been, and the response to should never have been, a partisan issue. This is about saving lives, and I know that as a mayor on the front line. So the idea that he's not going to look at the color of the media painting in a state in a presidential election to decide how and if he governs for a state. He will be a president that lays out those plans, those standards, brings governors together at the White House. I saw him do that with Barack Obama as a mayor when he brought mayors who were both Republican, Democratic, and independent together to listen to us, to hear what America's doing. Second, on the economy, when you look at what we've laid out for infrastructure, for jobs, for a new energy economy, those things are critical, and they're happening in the private sector already. The question is, will we have leadership from the White House or not? With Joe Biden becoming the president, we absolutely will. And I think it is those things to heal us spiritually, yes, to restore the soul of America, but to really put those plans together on the two most important things: responding to COVID-19. In the midst of all of this chaos, remember, we have more cases than we've seen in American history, the daily count yesterday. And second, to make sure that we get our economy back on track, stronger than ever.
There have been times when it seems like California and Donald Trump were at war with each other.
Yeah, I tried to ignore it most of the time because it was just the theater and the circus of Donald Trump, and we had great people that we'd interact with in federal government who were truly committed. I believe that at local government level, state and national level, that people want to help people. But unfortunately, they had a leader who was so toxic with his words, so divisive with what he said, that I often just tried not to take the bait because he wanted almost that as a whipping boy. He wanted to play out that cities, which are run, by the way, by Democrats and Republicans and independents, were somehow the reason for America's decline, even though he comes from one of them. These old tropes that he has put out for the last 4 years that have traumatized America, I think both his supporters as well as those who were against him will recede when you see that heart and that experience that Joe Biden brings. And we, quite frankly, have had a president for 4 years without heart and without that experience. America's crying out for both, and I think the voters very clearly this week have shown that that's what they want.
Assuming this does go as you expect right now, you're going to have a vacant Senate seat in the state of California. Any sense of who might be filling that?
That's the governor's call, and there's amazing people in California. I mean, we've been so lucky to have incredible women represent us. We're always a place that makes history, whether it's African-American woman or a Latino in a very Latino state. That's only one person can make that decision, and that's going to be Gavin Newsom, but I know he'll have a great group of people to pick from.
Mayor Eric Garcetti, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Lindsay Davis, we haven't talked about it much, in part because the election is still open, but history is about to be made if indeed Joe Biden does become the next president of the United States. Kamala Harris, the first woman of color to be vice president of the United States.
You know, I am really, well, if that moment happens, I can think not just for little girls in general, but brown and black girls in particular, how momentous this will be. Quite often, I think that there's so much power if you can see something, then you can believe it. And so to have potentially a woman who's been able to crack this second highest glass ceiling in this country is profound, it's powerful, and it reveals to young girls and women what their potential is, you know, by seeing this moment. And I don't want to get ahead of myself just yet. You know, we'll wait and see what happens. But it's really profound indeed.
Sarah Fagan, does that feeling transcend party lines?
I think it does, and it should. I mean, we should all be proud of the progress the country has made. We don't have to agree on the politics, and we certainly don't agree with Kamala Harris's policies. But it is good to see a woman in office. We just saw Amy Coney Barrett rise to be the 5th woman on the Supreme Court. That is another positive movement in this country. And frankly, Republican women had a very good night on Tuesday, doubling the number of women to be likely to be in the House of Representatives. So there's progress on both sides of the aisle, which is good for the country.
There it is. Yvette?
Major point of pride. I mean, I think about, you know, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and you saw the strolls to the polls, the significant impact that she had on getting women of all stripes, not just black women, animated, excited. HBCU, she comes from an HBCU, the excitement around that. I think, as you said, Lindsay, if you can see it, you can be it. The number of young girls who dressed up as Kamala Harris for Halloween, and you see these videos of young girls demonstrating that. And I think it is a really, really important thing. And not just that, I think the fact that she is a qualified woman who has worked hard, who could ascend to the presidency and be ready on day one, is also a point of pride. This was not like a token situation. She is qualified for this seat, and I think that is a really important thing for us to think about.
Pierre Thomas, she also has a strong background in law enforcement, prosecutor.
She does indeed. In fact, the fact that she's been in those critical positions, making critical decisions about law enforcement and crime in communities, if she were to become the vice president, that will no doubt be a major mark for many women across the country. And as an African-American male raised by black women and who's married to a very strong African-American woman attorney, I win very few arguments in my household. I can tell you that for many African-American women in particular, there's been so much sacrifice for their children and for all the people in their lives. And just having conversations with people I know, the notion that that sacrifice could lead to an African-American woman being in the second highest office in the land is no doubt something that many people will savor, George.
Rahm Emanuel, of course, you were chief of staff to Barack Obama, who broke another barrier as well. You know about the relationships between vice presidents and presidents. If she were to call you and say, okay, it's happening now, I'm going to be vice president of the United States, how do I handle it? What's the most important thing I need to do to succeed?
Well, one is I do want to echo, you cannot be what you cannot see for kids. And this is a tremendous moment. It's a tremendous moment for the country because Kamala, like Barack, in many ways, represented the best of the values of meritocracy. Somebody through hard work, diligence got there. A vice president changed since Walter Mondale. He changed that office, became a full partner in on national security, in on economics, the last person in that office to get the last word. Joe did that a lot of times. And I said, you know, Mr. Vice President, when you come up and your policy and your politics are 180 degrees apart, and nobody can help resolve something that's on a 50-50 yard line, and you walk back in the office, and you really want to be alone because nobody can resolve this, who is it that walks with you that, out of respect, you want to hear from them? And being able to get heard, then being able to execute. Vice President Biden did that for President. I remember when we had healthcare in Afghanistan going on simultaneously. Those in the Afghan meeting were against healthcare. Those in the healthcare meeting were against the Afghan policy. Vice President Biden helped keep both of those on their train tracks. That's what Kamala Harris could do, to be that loyal soldier to execute the agenda.
And David Muir, you got the chance to speak with her after the convention, and she extracted that commitment from Joe Biden that she would be the last person in the room to have the chance to have her say.
It was actually a powerful thing. What she said was, in the effort to kind of go after this role, to join Joe Biden on the ticket, to embrace Joe Biden's policies, there was enough debate in the primary whether she was more progressive than Joe Biden. I think there's really no debate. The answer was yes, but that she embraced where he was. What she said was, the model of who I would want to be as a vice president is sitting right here. What Joe Biden did for Barack Obama is what I hope to be able to do for Joe Biden. Also interesting is sort of the humanity that if they are elected, if she is the vice president, the tone that she brought to that first interview where they sat down together, particularly on COVID, the pandemic, which will be Joe Biden's issue number one. He made it clear yesterday. He came out and didn't talk about what America is watching unfold. He talked about the other issue at hand, the emergency unfolding, particularly this week. But what Kamala Harris said is issue number one for her when looking at the pandemic is this vaccine, and to make sure that the vaccine gets to the people on the front lines, the families who wouldn't necessarily be at the front of the line, that we have to really look seriously as a nation as to how we're going to unfold this process of getting a vaccine out once we know there is one that's safe and effective for distribution. And I think that humanity and using Joe Biden as her guide of who she wants to be as a vice president, if it happens, will serve a President-elect Biden well, again, if that's the way the day unfolds.
Chris Christie, go ahead.
Just wanted to add a moment, because obviously we've been talking about all this racial unrest and everything from this summer, and this has been a year of diversity and inclusion where corporations and a lot of companies have been talking about it. And I think that by and large, people often see it as an obligation. Hopefully we can start seeing it as an opportunity. When you have more voices, where you can incorporate more experiences, whether that's from a woman, whether that's from people of color. Perhaps if, again, she is to become the first female vice president, that's another opportunity to get that varied experience.
And see it as something just as completely normal, just the way it should be.
Exactly.
Chris Christie, you've been an executive. What do you look for in number two?
First, you look for someone who will tell you the truth. Second, you look for someone you like. You know, and people don't talk about that when they put the checklist together. But if you're going to be that last person who walks in the room, I'm going to tell you, if I don't like them, they're not coming in. You know, there has to be a personal connection there.
Bristle when they walk in the room.
Yeah, you know, you can't go, oh, God, now I got to talk to fill in the blank. You know, you don't want that. And so I remember when I was coming down, I was the first governor of New Jersey to ever have a lieutenant governor. We never had the position before I ran in 2009. And I got down to 3 different people, and I called one of my old law partners who I really respect. And I said, here are the 3 people, what do you think? And his question back to me was, which one do you like more? He said, pick the one you like more. He said, because you're going to have to spend a lot of time with this person, and more importantly, you're going to want to spend a lot of time with them to make them important. And I think that's a really important element of it. Is Senator Harris qualified? Of course she's qualified. Does she represent important constituencies? Yes. But I hope, and I suspect from watching them interact, that it's true.
Yeah, we knew
that
they had a warm relationship before the debates. There's some friction after that first attack in the first debate. They seem to recover from that.
No, and I think, listen, that's one of the things that will be advantageous if this is the way it works out for Vice President Biden, having all of those years of experiences. He's been through a lot of wars with a lot of people and then had to make up with them afterwards. I suspect that Senator Harris will be one of the easier ones he's had to do over the course of his career.
Good point. Cecilia Vega.
You know, I don't think we've really spent much time over the last few days looking back at the last 4 or 5 years of the Trump campaign turned Trump administration, because we're looking forward about what's going to happen in the next couple of days. But as my team and I were preparing to cover this election, we went back and just looked at some of the biggest moments of the last 4 years. And so many of the most inflammatory things that he has said have centered around race and racism and gender, from Charlottesville to Mexicans, are not sending their best people. They're sending, some of them are rapists, retweeting white power slogans down at the villages in Florida. And all of those things have led to what at times felt like made you question whether this tone and tenor had become just an acceptable way of dialogue in our country, whether people were okay with what they're hearing. And now when we look at what could potentially be this transition into someone like Kamala Harris coming into the White House as a vice president, I think it will make America pause a little bit and say, maybe that wasn't okay. Maybe this is not who we are as a country, and that we can move forward from some of this horrible ugliness that struck at the worst parts of our society for 4 years. And it wasn't just once, it was a real pattern of ugliness. So maybe now we pause, we take a breath, and we look back a little bit and move on and say that's not the way it has to be and won't be.
And we will see in the coming days if that is to be. Coming up on 1 o'clock here now in the East, and we've got some news out of Pennsylvania now. Joe Biden has now increased his lead to about 12,000. You see it there, 12,390 votes in the state of Pennsylvania. Rick Klein, let me bring you back in on this. Explain again how the decision desks of the networks are looking at this, how close we may be to a projection in these key states.
Yeah, so we see the same numbers that everyone else does, and we know that the overwhelming majority of the outstanding votes are from Democratic areas. And there are also mail-in votes, which tend to favor Democrats. But we continue to worry a little bit about the fact that there are some Republican-leaning counties that are part of the uncounted massive votes, and this question of provisional ballots. One of the big changes in the way that elections happen this year is that voters in Pennsylvania had the opportunity, like never before, to request a mail-in ballot. So many of them got it, and it's possible that a record number then came to the polls anyway. And then that takes more time to sort out whether that's a double count or it's an actual valid count, and it's taken counties more time to figure out the provisional ballot. So this is a lead that it's easy to see how it widens, but it's also possible to see that it narrows significantly, and we're back to a range of this state potentially, just potentially, being competitive.
And so we would not make a projection until we are as sure as we can be.
That's exactly right. We have been very cautious through this process, and I hope very transparent in explaining why we're coming to these decisions. And in this case in particular, we are going to be very, very meticulous in making sure we're right.
Okay, we are about to go off the air. One more time, let's recap where we are right now. 253 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 214 for Donald Trump's 22 states to 23. Joe Biden now has leads in the state of Arizona, the state of Nevada, the state of Georgia, and the state of Pennsylvania. He's behind President Trump in the state of North Carolina. As we said, we are going to go off the air. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, but we're standing by for any developments, any projections. Of course, we'll be back in prime time tonight with Vice President Biden. Have a good afternoon.